A rich man decided to thank an orphan and hired her to take care of his daughter. Upon returning home, he was petrified when he saw what the orphan had done to his daughter. Orange flames licked the walls of the Garcia mansion, casting demonic shadows across what had moments ago been a peaceful home. Michelle Thompson stood at the top of the grand staircase, her heart pounding against her ribs as thick smoke burned her lungs. 7-year-old Melissa Garcia lay unconscious in her arms, the child's weight growing heavier with each passing second. "Please, not again," Michelle whispered, memories of another fire, another night of terror, threatening to paralyze her. 20 years ago, she had been the child watching helplessly as flames consumed her parents. Now, fate had cruelly placed her in the middle of another inferno. The crackling of burning wood snapped her back to reality. The main staircase was rapidly becoming engulfed in flames, cutting off their primary escape route. Michelle could feel the heat intensifying, the smoke thickening. She pulled Melissa closer to her chest, using her own body as a shield against the falling embers. "Hold on, sweetheart," she murmured to the unconscious child. "I won't let anything happen to you." The sudden crash behind them made Michelle spin around. Part of the ceiling had collapsed, blocking their retreat. The only way was down through the flames. Images flashed through her mind, her mother's screams, her father's desperate attempt to save them, the masked robber's laughter as he dropped the match that night 20 years ago. The same cold eyes she had seen again just yesterday when 2 men had attempted to rob James Garcia. The recognition had struck her like lightning. The same man who had destroyed her family was now threatening another. But this time she wasn't a helpless child. This time she could fight back. The heat was becoming unbearable. Michelle wrapped Melissa in her own jacket, covering the girl's face. With a deep breath that filled her lungs with smoke, she began her descent. Each step was agony, the flames reaching for them like hungry demons. Her feet found each step through memory alone, the same stairs she had climbed countless times over the past months, caring for Melissa. Halfway down, a burning beam crashed beside them. Michelle stumbled, nearly losing her grip on Melissa. Pain shot through her leg as embers burned through her jeans, but she kept moving. The front door seemed miles away, a rectangle of light barely visible through the smoke. "Michelle," a voice cut through the roar of the flames. Deborah Walker, the housekeeper, was attempting to enter through the front door, but the heat pushed her back. "Michelle. Melissa." The desperation in Deborah's voice carried a deeper pain, the echo of another fire, another child lost. Michelle knew about Deborah's daughter, about the fire that had claimed her life 5 years ago. She could see it in the way the housekeeper watched her every move with Melissa, protecting the child from any potential harm, including, until now, Michelle herself. 3 more steps. 2. 1. Michelle burst through the smoky entrance, gasping for air. James Garcia had just pulled up in his car, his face contorting in horror at the sight of his burning home. But when he saw Michelle emerging with Melissa, his expression transformed into something else entirely, recognition, perhaps, of something he had missed before. As neighbors rushed to help and sirens wailed in the distance, Michelle finally allowed her legs to give way. She sank to the grass, still cradling Melissa. The girl stirred, coughing but alive. James reached them, gathering both into his arms, while Deborah hovered nearby, tears streaming down her face. None of them yet knew that this fire was no accident. None of them realized that the same man who had orphaned Michelle 2 decades ago had orchestrated this blaze. None of them understood that this was just the beginning, that the truth about Lucia Garcia's death, James's company's corruption, and Michelle's true connection to the family was about to unravel in ways none of them could imagine. But for now, in this moment, as Michelle looked up at the burning mansion, she made a silent promise to both the scared child she had once been and the girl she had just saved. This time, evil would not win. This time she would fight back. This time she would protect her family even if they didn't yet know they were hers. James Garcia stood at his office window on the 20th floor, his reflection ghosting against Austin's sprawling skyline. At 42, he cut an impressive figure tall, distinguished, with silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. His tailored suit couldn't hide the weight that had settled on his shoulders since Lucia's death 5 years ago. The morning sun caught his wedding ring still firmly in place. Some said it was time to move on, but how could he explain that taking off that ring felt like betraying not just Lucia's memory, but the very foundation of their shared dreams? He absently adjusted his tie, a habit that had become more pronounced since he'd become both CEO and single father. His corner office at Garcia Investments told a story of success: leather-bound books, modern art, awards lined up precisely on mahogany shelves. But success felt hollow in an empty home. He picked up the silver frame on his desk, Lucia radiant in white on their wedding day, her eyes sparkling with promises of a future they'd never get to share. Next to it, a more recent photo of Melissa, their daughter, her smile an echo of her mother's. Mr. Garcia, his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. The board meeting starts in 5 minutes. James straightened, slipping back into the role everyone expected: the confident leader, the decisive businessman. But his hand lingered on Melissa's photo. 7 years old now, and sometimes he caught her looking at Lucia's pictures with a confusion that broke his heart. How do you explain to a child that her mother's sudden illness wasn't so sudden after all? That the night before Lucia died, she had called him, frantic about documents she'd discovered in the company archives. He'd dismissed her concerns then, too busy with the merger to really listen. By the time he got home the next evening, she was gone, a brain aneurysm, they said. Clean, quick, natural. Yet something in Detective Marshall's eyes when he delivered the news had planted a seed of doubt that had grown stronger over the years. The elevator ride to the conference room gave James time to compose himself. Board meetings had become increasingly tense lately. Strange discrepancies in the books, mysterious transfers, projects failing for inexplicable reasons. His father had built Garcia Investments on transparency and trust, but lately James felt shadows growing in every corner. Looking sharp, James Richard Bennett, his father's oldest friend and now head of the board, clapped him on the shoulder. "How's little Melissa?" "Growing too fast," James replied, noting how Richard's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "She's asking questions about her mother." Something flickered across Richard's face: concern? Guilt? Before he turned away. "Children need answers," he said quietly. "But sometimes the truth is more dangerous than silence." Before James could respond, other board members filed in. He took his place at the head of the table, surrounded by faces he'd known since childhood. These men had attended his wedding, sent gifts when Melissa was born, mourned with him at Lucia's funeral. Yet lately he felt like a stranger among them. The meeting proceeded with its usual formality, but James's mind kept drifting to Melissa. He'd hired 3 nannies in the past year, all professionally qualified, all recommended by the agency Richard suggested. None had lasted more than a month. Melissa retreated further into herself with each departure. Deborah, their housekeeper of 15 years, did her best, but she had her own shadows to battle. James had never asked about the photos he'd seen in her room: a young girl with Deborah's eyes, newspaper clippings about a house fire, a small urn on a shelf. Some pain ran too deep for questions. James Richards' voice cut through his thoughts. "Your decision on the Thompson property acquisition." James stiffened. The Thompson case had been bothering him, a family business destroyed by fire 20 years ago, the land now prime real estate. Something about the timing felt wrong, but he couldn't place why. "I need more time to review," he said finally, ignoring Richard's frown. "Something doesn't add up." As the meeting adjourned, James gathered his papers, his mind already on the evening ahead. Melissa had her ballet recital, another moment Lucia should have been there for, another memory he'd have to preserve alone. He checked his watch, calculated traffic patterns, wondered if he'd make it this time. The sky had clouded over as he walked to his car, Austin's humidity pressing in like a physical weight. He loosened his tie, thinking of Melissa waiting in her tutu, scanning the audience for his face. He wouldn't let her down. Not again. He didn't notice the two men watching from a black sedan across the street. Didn't see one of them speak into a phone. He's leaving now. Alone. Do we proceed? A single word came back: wait. In the fading afternoon light, 7-year-old Melissa Garcia sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, surrounded by a carefully arranged circle of dolls. Her long dark hair, so like her mother's, fell forward as she leaned to adjust a doll's dress. The room itself was a testament to her father's attempts to fill an unfillable void: designer furniture, expensive toys, walls hand-painted with enchanted forests that seemed to mock the loneliness within. "You sit here, Lucy," she whispered, placing her favorite doll, named after fragments of memories of her mother, Lucia, in the place of honor. "It's time for our daily tea party." Her voice carried the peculiar formality of a child who spent too much time with adults, who had learned too early to be self-sufficient. Through her open window came the sounds of other children playing in the wealthy Austin neighborhood: laughter, shouts, the normal chaos of childhood. But Melissa remained in her self-imposed isolation, perfecting her miniature world where she could control everything, where no one disappeared without saying goodbye. The shelf above her bed held photographs she studied every night, her mother holding her as a baby, both of them smiling at the camera, her father looking younger, less burdened, a family portrait taken just weeks before everything changed. At 7, Melissa was already an expert at reading the sadness adults tried to hide. She saw it in her father's eyes when he looked at her, in Deborah's careful attention, in the way teachers spoke softly around her as if she might break. "Miss Melissa," Deborah's voice came from the doorway. "Your dinner's getting cold." Melissa looked up, caught the familiar worry in the housekeeper's eyes. "Is Daddy coming home for dinner tonight?" "He's trying his best to make it to your recital, sweetheart." Deborah's voice held that special gentleness adults used when they weren't quite telling the truth. The ballet shoes in the corner seemed to mock her. Brand new pink satin, perfect like everything in her life, except the things that really mattered. 3 recitals this year, 3 empty seats where parents should be. Her father always promised, always had emergencies, always sent Deborah with flowers and apologies. At school, Melissa was known as the quiet one. Teachers praised her perfect grades, her immaculate appearance, her unfailing politeness. None of them saw her in moments like this, when she lined up her dolls and taught them about loss. "Sometimes mummies go away," she would explain to their plastic faces. "Sometimes daddies are there but not really there. Sometimes you have to be very, very good so no one else leaves." The nannies came and went like seasons. Each arrival brought hope maybe this one would stay, would fill the emptiness in the big house. Each departure reinforced what Melissa already knew: nothing was permanent except loss. She learned to keep her distance, to be perfect and polite, but never too attached. Her classmates didn't understand why she declined birthday party invitations, why she sat alone at lunch reading books far above her grade level. How could she explain that other families hurt to watch? That seeing mothers brush their daughters' hair or fathers laughing at jokes made something inside her twist like a knife. In her closet, hidden behind designer dresses she hadn't asked for, Melissa kept a box. Inside was her mother's scarf, still holding a trace of perfume or lipstick she'd snuck from her mother's untouched vanity newspaper clippings about the tragic sudden death. That she was too young to fully understand, but read obsessively anyway. "Lucy," she whispered to her doll now, "do you think angels can see ballet recitals? Do you think Mummy watches me dance?" The doll stared back with painted eyes, offering no answers. Outside, the other children's voices had faded. The enchanted forest on her walls cast lengthening shadows, the painted trees seeming to reach for her with dark branches. Melissa stood, smoothing her dress with habitual precision. She walked to her mirror, practiced her smile until it looked real enough to fool teachers, to reassure her father, to keep Deborah from worrying quite so much. 7 years old, and already a master of masks. "Coming, Deborah," she called, her voice clear and controlled. She gave her dolls one last look, these silent witnesses to her solitude. "We'll finish our tea party later." She promised, though she was starting to understand that some things like perfect tea parties, like complete families, existed only in stories. In the hallway, she paused at her mother's portrait. "Watch me dance tonight, Mummy," she whispered. "I'll be perfect, I promise." She descended the stairs to another quiet dinner, another evening of practiced smiles and careful conversation, another night of waiting for footsteps that might not come. In her pink tutu later, she would spin and spin, as if somehow if she moved fast enough, she could turn back time to when her world was whole. Michelle Thompson's reflection stared back at her from the cracked mirror of her small apartment bathroom, the scar along her left temple a permanent reminder of the night that defined her life. At 25, she carried herself with a watchful grace, her movements deliberate, her green eyes always alert for danger others couldn't see. The small studio apartment she called home was Spartan, but meticulously organized, a habit formed in the orphanage where chaos meant vulnerability. 20 years had passed since that night, but the memories remained razor-sharp. The Thompson family home had been modest but happy, filled with her father's laughter and her mother's singing. David Thompson ran a small but successful electronics store. Her mother Sarah taught piano. They weren't wealthy, but they were rich in love until the night the men in black masks came. She could still hear her father's voice, "Take whatever you want. Just don't hurt my family." Could still see her mother trying to shield her, smell the gasoline being splashed around their home, feel the heat of the flames. The leader's cold eyes through his mask haunted her dreams, eyes she would never forget, eyes she had seen again yesterday watching James Garcia's car. The orphanage that took her in was well-meaning but overcrowded. Michelle learned quickly that survival meant being invisible, meant watching and listening, meant never showing weakness. She excelled in school, earned scholarships, worked multiple jobs. But every achievement felt hollow without her parents to share it. Her small desk held newspaper clippings about the Thompson Electronics fire, labeled a tragic accident. Insurance investigations, police reports, all pointing to faulty wiring. But Michelle knew better. She had spent years piecing together the truth. Her father had discovered something about missing shipments and altered serial numbers. He had been about to report it when the fire happened. The walls of her apartment were covered with maps of Austin, photos of business leaders, strings connecting seemingly unrelated events. Some might call it obsession, Michelle called it justice. She had traced the web of corruption through shell companies and real estate deals, always finding the same names appearing: Garcia Investments, Bennett Holdings, Marshall Securities. When she saw James Garcia's car being approached by the men yesterday, something clicked. The same tactics, the same cold precision. She hadn't planned to intervene. Years of investigating had taught her to stay in the shadows. But seeing that father, knowing his daughter waited at home, Michelle couldn't stand by and watch another family be destroyed. Her phone buzzed a text from her contact in the police department. Another file about the Garcia case, another piece of the puzzle. Michelle's fingers traced the scar on her temple, remembering the falling beam that had nearly killed her, remembering the officer who had pulled her from the flames. Detective Marshall had been kind, had visited her in the hospital, had even helped her find placement in the orphanage. Years later, she discovered his connection to the very people who had murdered her parents. The irony of now working in the Garcia household wasn't lost on her. James Garcia's company had been one of many she'd investigated, looking for connections to her parents' murder. But watching him with Melissa, seeing his genuine love for his daughter, Michelle began to suspect he was as much a victim as she had been. The corruption ran deeper, reached higher. Her small closet held two Michelle Thompsons, one rack of simple, practical clothes for her new role as nanny, another of carefully chosen outfits for her other life investigating, following leads, piecing together the truth. She had learned to blend in, to be forgettable, to move through the world like a shadow. But Melissa Garcia had changed everything. The girl's loneliness, her quiet strength, her careful smiles. Michelle saw herself in every gesture. Each day spent with Melissa made it harder to maintain emotional distance, harder to remember this was just part of her investigation. The walls she had built over 20 years were developing cracks. Michelle checked her watch time to head to the Garcia house. She grabbed her bag, double-checked the taser hidden in her ankle holster, a precaution she never went without. The morning sun caught her mother's ring on its chain around her neck, the only thing she had managed to save from the fire. "I'm getting closer," she whispered to the ring, a daily ritual. "I promise Mom and Dad I'll find the truth. And this time I'll protect them. I won't let what happened to us happen to Melissa." She locked her apartment, nodding to the elderly neighbor who thought she was just another young woman working as a nanny. No one looking at Michelle Thompson would guess that beneath her calm exterior lay 20 years of carefully planned revenge, or that her path to justice would soon collide with secrets that could destroy the very family she had grown to love. Deborah Walker moved through the Garcia mansion with practiced efficiency, her footsteps silent on the polished floors she had maintained for 15 years. At 53, her graying hair always neatly pinned back, she wore her housekeeper's uniform like armor-pressed, pristine, perfect. Every surface in the house gleamed under her care, but no amount of polish could shine away the shadows in her eyes. In her private quarters, behind a locked door, stood a shrine to what she had lost, a porcelain ballet shoe, half melted by flames, a framed photo of her daughter Emma at 7, the same age as Melissa now, her smile bright and untroubled. Next to it, newspaper clippings about the fire that had claimed Emma's life 5 years ago, the same year Lucia Garcia died, though few made that connection. The official report called it an electrical fault. Faulty wiring in an old apartment building, they said. But Deborah remembered Emma's last phone call. "Mummy, someone's trying to get in." She had rushed home from her evening shift at the hospital, but by then the building was an inferno. She could still hear the firefighters holding her back as she screamed her daughter's name. Her hands moved automatically through their daily routine, dusting photos, straightening pillows, keeping order in a world that had proven itself fundamentally disordered. Each task was a prayer, a desperate attempt to protect Melissa from the chaos that had claimed Emma. Perhaps if everything was perfect enough, controlled enough, tragedy couldn't strike twice. Mrs. Walker, the new nanny's voice, made her stiffen. Michelle Thompson stood in the doorway, young and earnest and somehow too observant. "Would you like help with those linens?" Deborah's "no, thank you" was polite but firm. She watched Michelle walk away, noting the girl's careful movements, the way her eyes scanned each room she entered. There was something about Michelle that set off warning bells, not threat exactly, but awareness. The girl noticed too much, asked too many careful questions about the house's routines, about the family's history. In her room each night, Deborah added to her own careful notes. Michelle Thompson's references checked out perfectly, too perfectly, too perfectly. Her background story was consistent, but felt rehearsed. She moved like someone who had learned to watch her back, not like the other young nannies who had passed through the Garcia house. The small urn on Deborah's shelf contained Emma's ashes. She touched it each morning and night, a ritual of remembrance. "I'm watching over another little girl now," she would whisper. "I won't fail this time." But Michelle's arrival had disrupted her careful vigil, introduced variables she couldn't control. James didn't see it, too grateful for Melissa's sudden happiness. The girl had bloomed under Michelle's care, showing sparks of the joyful child she had been before her mother's death. But Deborah saw how Michelle's questions often circled back to Lucia's passing, to the company's history, to the mysterious changes in security protocols that had preceded both deaths. 5 years ago, the night before Lucia died, Deborah had seen her in the home office, frantically copying files. When she'd offered help, Lucia had jumped, quickly hiding the papers. "Some things are better not known," Lucia had said, her face pale. "Watch over Melissa, Deborah." Promise me the next day she was gone. Now, watching Michelle with Melissa, Deborah felt the same creeping unease. The girl was too perfect, too careful, too interested in the family's past. But confronting James would mean explaining her suspicions, which meant revealing her own secrets, the private investigation she'd conducted after Emma's death, the connection she'd discovered between the two fires, the questions that still haunted her. Her fingers traced the familiar pattern of her daughter's name on the urn. Emma would have been 20 now, perhaps working as a teacher like she'd dreamed. Instead, she was ashen memory, and Deborah was left guarding another child against shadows she couldn't quite identify. The sound of Melissa's laughter drifted up from the garden where Michelle was teaching her cartwheels. 5 years of silence in this house, and now laughter. It should have been comforting. Instead, it made Deborah's hands shake as she gripped her feather duster tighter. "I'm watching," she whispered to Emma's photo. "I won't let history repeat itself. I promise." But promises, she had learned, were as fragile as the lives they were meant to protect. And somewhere in this house of secrets and half-truths, a clock was ticking toward revelations that would shatter the careful walls they had all built around their grief. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across downtown Austin as James Garcia left his office building, briefcase heavy with documents he hadn't found time to review. His mind was already at the ballet studio where Melissa waited, another recital he would likely miss. The parking garage was eerily quiet, his footsteps echoing off concrete walls. He didn't notice the two men until they were beside his car. The first one, tall and broad-shouldered, tapped on the passenger window with something metallic. The second, leaner but with cold, familiar eyes, stepped closer to James. Inside the car, Mr. Garcia, the lean man, commanded, his voice carrying an edge that suggested compliance wasn't optional. "Let's make this simple." James's hand tightened on his briefcase, years of business negotiations keeping his voice steady. "Take the car. Take my wallet. There's no need for violence." A harsh laugh. "Oh, we want more than your wallet. Those files you've been reviewing about the Thompson case? Hand them over." The mention of Thompson made James's blood run cold. He had spent weeks investigating discrepancies in that 20-year-old acquisition, finding threads that led to uncomfortable questions about his own company. The first man moved closer, metal glinting in his hand. "Don't make this difficult." "Hey," a woman's voice rang out across the garage. "Leave him alone." All three men turned. A young woman in simple work clothes stood at the garage entrance, her stance suggesting she wouldn't back down. James recognized her from the neighborhood. She washed cars for a living, often worked near his office. "Walk away, girl," the lean man warned. "This isn't your business." Instead, she moved closer, her green eyes locked on the man's face with an intensity that seemed personal. "I know who you are," she said quietly. "I remember those eyes. The Thompson fire. You haven't changed." The man's face changed, recognition flickering. The brat survived. Everything happened at once. The first man lunged toward James. The woman, Michelle Thompson, though James didn't know her name yet, grabbed a loose piece of concrete and threw it with surprising accuracy, striking the man's arm. The metallic object clattered to the ground. "Run," Michelle shouted to James, but she was already moving, her body colliding with the lean man as he reached for what was clearly a weapon. They went down hard on the concrete. James didn't run. Instead, he swung his briefcase, catching the first attacker in the head. The man stumbled, cursing. Michelle had somehow gained the upper hand on her opponent, her movements suggesting years of self-defense training. Police, a security guard's voice echoed through the garage. The attackers scrambled up, the lean man giving Michelle one last look of pure hatred before they disappeared into the shadows. James helped Michelle to her feet, noticing the tremor in her hands despite her composed face. "That was incredibly brave," he said, "and incredibly foolish. They could have killed you." "They already tried once," she replied quietly, touching a scar near her temple. 20 years ago." Understanding dawned. "Thompson. You're David Thompson's daughter." She nodded, then swayed slightly. James caught her arm, feeling the adrenaline crash hit her. "Let me buy you a coffee," he said. "I think we have a lot to discuss." As they walked to his regular cafe, James studied the young woman who had just saved his life. She carried herself with a dignity that belied her worn clothes and difficult circumstances. Something about her reminded him of Lucia, the same quiet strength, the same watchful intelligence. What he didn't know yet was how this chance encounter would change everything. He didn't see how Michelle's hands shook not from fear but from recognition the man who had killed her parents was connected to his company. He couldn't know that his offer of coffee would lead to a job offer, would bring Michelle into his home, would set in motion events that would unravel 20 years of carefully hidden secrets. All he knew was that he owed this brave young woman his life, and that somehow, for the first time since Lucia's death, he felt hope stirring in his heart. The small cafe near James's office felt like another world after the violence in the parking garage. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through vintage stained glass windows, casting colored patterns across their corner table. Michelle Thompson sat across from James, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup she hadn't yet tasted. "Tell me about your parents," James said gently, watching her struggle to maintain composure. "I remember hearing about the Thompson Electronics fire, but the details were unclear." Michelle's fingers tightened on her cup. "My father discovered irregularities in his shipping manifests. Electronics arriving with serial numbers that didn't match the records. When he started asking questions..." She paused, swallowing hard. "That man in the garage, the one with the cold eyes, he was there the night of the fire." James leaned forward, his own coffee forgotten. "And you're certain it was him?" "Those eyes haunt my dreams. He watched our house burn with my parents inside." Her voice was steady, but her knuckles were white against the porcelain cup. "I survived because my mother pushed me through a bathroom window." The scar. She touched her temple. "A falling beam caught me as I escaped." Something clicked in James's mind. The Thompson property acquisition, that was your family store. Michelle nodded. "Bought for pennies after the fire by a shell company. I've tracked the ownership through dozens of transfers, but it always leads back to..." "But..." "Garcia Investments," James finished, his face darkening. "My father's company. My company." "I don't think you know what's really happening in your company, Mr. Garcia. Just like my father didn't know what was really moving through his store." James studied her face, seeing beyond the worn clothes to the intelligence and determination in her eyes. "How have you survived all these years?" "Or the orphanage until I was 18. Then odd jobs, mostly. Car washing pays the bills while she hesitated." "Why you investigate what happened to your parents?" James finished. He was quiet for a moment, thinking of Melissa at home, of Lucia's strange behavior before her death, of the growing sense that something was very wrong at Garcia Investments. "I have a proposition for you, Michelle." He set down his cup. "Decision made. My daughter Melissa needs a nanny, someone I can trust completely." Michelle's surprise was evident. "Mr. Garcia, I have no experience as a nanny. I'm not qualified." "You risked your life to save a stranger today. That tells me more about your character than any qualification." He leaned forward. "Melissa is 7. She lost her mother 5 years ago, under circumstances I'm beginning to question. She needs someone strong, someone who understands loss. And I..." He paused. "I need someone who can help me understand what's happening in my company." "You're offering me a job to investigate your own company?" I'm offering you a chance to find the truth while protecting my daughter. The salary would allow you to stop washing cars. You'd have a room in our home, access to resources you need. He met her gaze directly. And my protection while you investigate. Michelle was silent for a long moment. Your housekeeper won't like it. A stranger suddenly living in the house. Deborah is protective of Melissa, yes, but she's loyal to our family. James smiled slightly. She may be suspicious at first, but she'll accept my decision. The sun had shifted, the colored light now falling across Michelle's face, highlighting both her youth and the weight of experience in her eyes. Why are you really offering me this, Mr. Garcia? Because my wife was trying to tell me something the night before she died. Because those men today wanted specific files. Because I'm starting to see connections I've been blind to for years. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a photo of Melissa. And because my daughter needs someone who will fight for her as fiercely as your mother fought for you. Michelle touched the photo gently, seeing in Melissa's eyes the same loneliness she had known. When do I start? Tonight, James said, standing. Melissa has a ballet recital. I think it's time she had someone in the audience who won't let her down. Neither of them could know how this decision would change their lives forever, setting in motion events that would expose decades of secrets and lies. But in that moment, as they left the cafe together, both felt the weight of destiny settling on their shoulders. Deborah Walker stood in the Garcia mansion's kitchen, her hands gripping the counter until her knuckles turned white. Through the window, she could see James's car pulling into the driveway with not one, but two passengers. The strange young woman from this morning, the one who had arrived with James to collect Melissa from her ballet recital, was back. A new nanny James had announced at dinner, as if bringing a complete stranger into their home was the most natural thing in the world. Michelle Thompson will be living with us. The name Thompson had made Deborah's teacup rattle against its saucer. Thompson Electronics, the fire, the connection to Emma's death that she'd been trying to prove for years. Now, a Thompson was going to live under their roof? Mrs. Walker, Michelle's voice from the doorway made her spin around. The girl stood there, still in her simple work clothes, but carrying herself with an assurance that set off every warning bell in Deborah's mind. Miss Thompson, Deborah's voice was frost. I assume Mr. Garcia showed you to your room. Yes, thank you. Michelle stepped into the kitchen, her movements too careful, too measured. I wanted to ask about Melissa's routine, her preferences. I've managed Melissa's care for 5 years, Deborah cut in. Since her mother died, I know her routines, her needs, her fears. What I don't know is why Mr. Garcia would hire someone with no childcare experience, no references, no pedigree. Michelle's voice was quiet but firm. No fancy credentials. No explanation for why you're really here. Deborah moved closer, lowering her voice. I saw how you watched the security system when James gave you the tour. How you noted every entrance and exit. Those aren't the observations of a nanny. Something flickered in Michelle's eyes. Respect, perhaps. You're very observant, Mrs. Walker. I protect this family. It's what I promised Lucia before she died. Deborah's hand went unconsciously to the locket she wore, the one containing a photo of Emma. I won't let anyone harm them. Even if trying to protect them means missing the real threat, Michelle asked softly. Deborah stiffened. What do you know about threats? I know about fires that aren't accidents, about little girls who lose their mothers too soon, about questions that no one wants to answer. Michelle's gaze fell on the locket. And I suspect you do too. The kitchen felt suddenly airless. Deborah's hand trembled as she touched her locket. Who are you really? Someone who wants the truth. Just like you. Michelle stepped closer. Mrs. Walker, I know about your daughter. About the fire that killed her. Have you ever wondered why it happened the same year as Lucia's death? The world tilted on its axis. Deborah grabbed the counter for support. How do you? Because I've been investigating these connections for 20 years, since another fire killed my parents. Michelle's voice was gentle now. We're on the same side, Mrs. Walker. Even if you don't trust me yet." Heavy footsteps in the hallway made them both step back. James appeared in the doorway, Melissa half asleep in his arms. "Everything all right in here?" "Just discussing household routines," Deborah said smoothly, years of practice keeping her voice steady. "Shall I take Melissa to bed?" "I can do it," Michelle offered, and before Deborah could protest, James was transferring his sleeping daughter to the new nanny's arms. Deborah watched Michelle carry Melissa upstairs, her touch gentle but secure. James followed, leaving Deborah alone in the kitchen with her churning thoughts. She moved to her room, pulled out her private notebook, years of careful observations, connections, questions about Lucia's death, and Emma's fire. Michelle Thompson's appearance couldn't be coincidence. But was she an ally in uncovering the truth, or part of whatever conspiracy had killed Lucia and Emma? One thing was certain: Deborah would be watching every move the new nanny made. She had failed to protect Emma. She had failed to save Lucia. She would not fail Melissa. In her room upstairs, Michelle was thinking similar thoughts, knowing she had found both an ally and an obstacle in the watchful housekeeper. The game had begun, and the stakes were higher than ever. Melissa Garcia stood in her ballet shoes before her bedroom mirror, still wearing her recital costume. It was past her bedtime, but something about this night felt different. For the first time in years, someone had watched her entire performance, their eyes never leaving the stage. Michelle Thompson hadn't just attended, she had understood. "Your arms tell stories," Michelle had said afterward, as they drove home. "When you dance, it's like you're speaking without words." Now, as Michelle helped her out of her tutu, Melissa studied the new nanny's reflection in the mirror. "You saw it, didn't you? The sad part in the middle of the dance." Michelle's hands stilled on the costume's ribbons. "Yes, I did. It reminded me of how I felt when I lost my parents." Melissa turned, her eyes wide. "You lost your parents too?" "I was about your age." Michelle sat on the bed, patting the space beside her. Melissa climbed up, her small face serious. "There was a fire. My mother saved my life, just like my dad tried to save hers." "My mum died too," Melissa whispered. "But nobody tells me how. They just say she got sick really fast." She twisted her hands in her lap. "Sometimes I hear Daddy crying in his office when he thinks I'm asleep." Michelle gently smoothed Melissa's dark hair, so like her own. "It's hard when grown-ups try to protect us by keeping secrets, isn't it?" Melissa nodded vigorously. "Deborah does that too. She watches me all the time, like she's scared something bad will happen. And when I ask about Mom, everyone gets quiet." "What do you remember about your mom?" "She used to sing while she worked in the home office. And she smelled like jasmine." Melissa reached under her pillow, pulled out a worn photograph. "This is the last picture we took together. See how she's holding papers? She looked worried that day." Michelle studied the photo, noting the documents in Lucia Garcia's hands, the tension in her face. "Do you remember anything else about that day?" "She was crying when she kissed me goodnight. She said sometimes being brave means telling the truth. Even when it's scary." "I didn't understand then." Melissa's voice dropped to a whisper. "She died the next day." Something cold settled in Michelle's stomach. The timing, the documents, the last message about truth, it all fit a pattern she knew too well. But looking at Melissa's trusting face, she pushed aside her investigator's instincts. "Would you like to make a deal?" Michelle asked, taking Melissa's small hands in hers. "I promise to always tell you the truth, even when it's hard. And in return, you tell me if anything scary or strange happens, okay?" Melissa squeezed her hands, like a secret code between sisters. The word sisters caught Michelle off guard, bringing unexpected tears to her eyes. "Yes, exactly like sisters." "Then can I show you something?" I'd never shown anyone else. Melissa slid off the bed, went to her closet. Behind her rows of dresses, she pulled out a small box. These were Mom's. I found them hidden in her desk after. After she went away, inside the box were newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and a USB drive. Michelle's heart raced, but she kept her voice calm. "This was very brave of you to keep safe, Melissa. Very brave indeed. Will you help me understand what they mean? Sometimes I take them out and try to read them, but some of the words are too big." Michelle hugged the little girl close, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. In Melissa, she saw herself at that age keeping secrets, searching for truth, trying to be brave. But this time, the child wouldn't face it alone. "We'll figure it out together," Michelle promised. "That's what sisters are for." From the doorway, unseen by either of them, Deborah watched the interaction with conflicting emotions. The tenderness in Michelle's voice seemed genuine, but the box of Lucia's belongings, how had she known to ask about them? What game was she really playing? As Melissa drifted off to sleep, clutching Michelle's hand, both women, nanny and housekeeper, knew that tonight had changed everything. The truth about Lucia Garcia's death was no longer just a hidden secret, it was now a promise between sisters. Long after midnight, when the Garcia mansion lay silent, Michelle sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by the contents of Lucia Garcia's hidden box. The USB drive glowed softly from her laptop, its contents painting a picture more sinister than she'd imagined. Emails, shipping manifests, bank transfers, all connecting Garcia Investments to the shell company that had bought her family's store after the fire. But it was a series of photographs that made her hands shake, surveillance images of her father's store, dates stamped the week before the fire. And in one corner, a face she recognized: Richard Bennett, James's trusted board member, speaking with the man whose cold eyes had haunted her for 20 years. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Michelle quickly closed her laptop, heart pounding. Footsteps approached, then passed Deborah making her nightly rounds. The housekeeper's vigilance was both comforting and concerning. How much did she know? Once the footsteps faded, Michelle reopened the files. Lucia's handwritten notes were meticulous, documenting a pattern of suspicious acquisitions, properties purchased after convenient accidents, businesses bought for fractions of their worth after owners mysteriously disappeared or died. The Thompson Electronics fire wasn't an isolated incident, it was part of a systematic plan. A particular note caught her eye: Emma Walker connection. Michelle's breath caught. Emma Walker, Deborah's daughter. The fire that killed her wasn't random either. Lucia had been connecting the dots, just as Michelle had been doing for years. The final document was dated the day before Lucia died. But an email draft never sent: James, if you're reading this, I'm probably dead. The company your father built is being used for something terrible. Richard isn't who you think. The Thompson fire, the Walker girl, they're all connected. Look in the old archive room. Behind the painting of your father, I've hidden proof. A soft knock made Michelle jump. She quickly shut the laptop again. Melissa's small voice came through the door. "I had a bad dream." Opening the door, Michelle found the little girl in her pajamas, tears on her cheeks. Without hesitation, she pulled Melissa into a hug. "Want to talk about it?" "I saw Mom in the office again, like that last night. She was crying, looking at papers." Melissa's voice trembled. "But this time, in my dream, there was a man watching through the window. He had cold eyes." Michelle's blood froze. "Have you seen this man before, in real life?" Melissa nodded slowly. "He comes to Daddy's office sometimes, with Uncle Richard. He scares me, but Daddy says he's an important business partner." Holding Melissa tighter, Michelle's mind raced. The girl had seen him, the man who killed her parents, who likely killed her own mother, walking freely through Garcia Investments, protected by Richard Bennett's influence. "Does your father know about these dreams?" "I tried to tell him once, but Uncle Richard was there. He said I was just imagining things, that kids make up stories when they're sad." Melissa's fingers clutched Michelle's nightgown. "But I'm not making it up. I saw Mom hide something that night, behind Grandpa's picture." the archive room. The painting. Lucia's final message. It all connected. "Melissa, listen to me." Michelle pulled back to look into the girl's eyes. "You're not imagining things. Your mom was very brave and very smart. She was trying to protect people. Like you're trying to protect us." The question, so innocent yet so perceptive, made Michelle pause. "What makes you say that?" "I saw you looking at the papers in my box. They're the same ones Mom was holding that night, and you watch everything, like Deborah does. Like you're guarding us." From the mouth of a child, the truth laid bare. Michelle smoothed Melissa's hair, making a decision. "Tomorrow I need to check something in your father's office. Will you help me?" Melissa's face brightened despite her tears, like a secret mission. "Exactly like that. But we have to be very careful. Some secrets are dangerous. Because of the man with the cold eyes." "Yes, sweetheart, but I promise you something: I won't let him hurt anyone else. Not you, not your father, not anyone." As Melissa finally drifted off to sleep in her arms, Michelle stared into the darkness. Tomorrow, she would find what Lucia had hidden behind that painting. But tonight, holding this precious child who had somehow become more than just part of her mission, she understood exactly why Lucia had sacrificed everything to protect her family. In the hallway, Deborah stood frozen, having heard every word. Her hand clutched her locket containing Emma's picture, her mind reeling from the revelations. Perhaps it was time to share her own evidence with the young woman she had been so quick to distrust. The Garcia Investments archive room lay in the oldest part of the building, a space that smelled of leather and secrets. Michelle stood before the imposing portrait of James Garcia, studying the stern face of the company's founder. Beside her, Melissa bounced nervously on her toes, playing lookout while pretending to read a book. "Are you sure about this?" Deborah whispered, her unexpected alliance still fragile but crucial. After their dawn conversation, sharing evidence and connecting dots, the housekeeper had insisted on coming along. Michelle nodded, running her fingers along the frame's edge. Lucia's last message mentioned this painting specifically. She knew she was in danger, and she trusted her husband would eventually find what she hid. "Daddy never comes in here anymore," Melissa offered quietly. "He says it makes him sad." The painting was massive, covering most of the wall. Behind it, according to the building's original plans Deborah had somehow obtained, was a shallow alcove once used to house the building's safe before modern security was installed. "Ready?" Michelle asked, receiving nods from both companions. Together, they carefully lifted the heavy frame away from the wall. The alcove was there, just as the plans showed, and wedged into a crack in the plaster was a slim metal case, the kind lawyers use for crucial documents. Michelle's hands trembled as she pulled it free. "Someone's coming," Melissa hissed, diving back to her reading spot. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Michelle quickly passed the case to Deborah, who concealed it beneath her sweater just as Richard Bennett appeared in the doorway. "Well, well," he said, his cultured voice carrying an edge. "What brings our new nanny to the archives?" "Miss Thompson was just showing me the history books," Melissa piped up, her young voice steady despite her fear, "for my school project about family businesses." Richard's eyes narrowed, scanning the room. "How? Educational? Though I'm surprised to see you here, Deborah. Aren't there duties upstairs?" "I go where Melissa goes," Deborah replied firmly, "as I have for 7 years. Of course." Richard stepped further into the room, his gaze fixing on the painting. "Was it slightly askew? Your dedication is admirable, much like Lucia's was, though sometimes dedication can lead people to unfortunate discoveries." But the threat in his words was unmistakable. Michelle moved slightly, positioning herself between Richard and Melissa. "We should head back. It's almost time for Melissa's lunch." Indeed, Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes, though I'd caution you, Miss Thompson, about developing too much. Curiosity about the past. Some doors are better left closed, for everyone's safety. As they hurried from the room, Michelle caught a glimpse of Richard pulling out his phone, speaking in low, urgent tones. Her heart raced. They had what Lucia had hidden, but their discovery hadn't gone unnoticed. In Deborah's private room, they carefully opened the case. Inside were more documents, but also something unexpected, a key and a handwritten note in Lucia's elegant script. To whoever finds this, the full evidence is in safety deposit box 247 at First National. What they did to the Thompsons, to Emma Walker, to so many others, it can't continue. Be careful, they're watching. Trust no one outside the family. And James, my love, if you're reading this, look closer at the Thompson fire. The truth about your father's legacy is hidden there. Michelle's hands shook. She knew. About my parents, about Emma. She was gathering evidence. And they killed her for it, Deborah whispered, touching her locket, just like they killed my Emma when she saw something she shouldn't have. Melissa, who had been quietly absorbing everything, suddenly grabbed Michelle's arm. The man with the cold eyes, he was there that night, watching Mum through the window. I remember now. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Lucia had discovered the truth about Garcia Investments' dark legacy. She had tried to protect everyone and paid with her life. We need to get to that safety deposit box, Michelle said. But Richard's watching now. He knows we found something. We need help, Deborah decided. It's time to tell James everything. But as they looked out the window, they saw Richard's car pulling away from the mansion, heading in the direction of First National Bank. It was a race now. A race against time, against killers who had operated in shadows for decades, against men who wouldn't hesitate to silence anyone who threatened their secrets. And somewhere in the city, a man with cold eyes was already receiving his orders. James Garcia sat in his office, staring at the documents spread across his desk, his world crumbling around him. Michelle, Deborah, and Melissa stood before him, having just shared their discoveries and revelations. The metal case from behind his father's portrait lay open, its damning contents exposed. My father, his voice cracked. He built this company on blood money? On orchestrated accidents and fires? James Michelle stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. Your father may have started it, but Richard Bennett continued it. He's the one who ordered my parents' murder, who was behind Emma's death, who silenced Lucia when she discovered the truth. Daddy, Melissa whispered, moving to touch his hand. Mom was trying to stop them. That's why she was so scared that last night. James pulled his daughter close, his other hand clenching into a fist. Richard was like an uncle to you, Melissa. He helped me raise you after he couldn't finish the sentence. The man who watched through the window that night, Melissa continued, her small voice steady. The one with the cold eyes. He works with Uncle Richard. I saw them talking in your office last week. Deborah moved closer, placing a protective hand on Melissa's shoulder. James, Lucia left evidence in a safety deposit box. But Richard is already heading there. We need to act now. James stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. No, his voice was steel. You three stay here where it's safe. I'm ending this myself. You can't face them alone, Michelle protested. They've killed to keep these secrets. They won't hesitate to kill again. They killed my wife. James's shout made Melissa flinch. He immediately softened his voice, kneeling before his daughter. I'm sorry, sweetheart, but I need to make this right. Then let us help, Michelle insisted. I've been tracking them for 20 years. I know how they operate. Deborah has evidence about Emma's death that ties everything together. We're stronger together. A commotion in the hallway made them all freeze. Richard's voice carried through the door, accompanied by heavy footsteps. James? We need to talk about your recent inquiries into the Thompson case. James quickly gathered the documents, shoving them into his desk drawer. Hide, he hissed to the others. Now. Michelle pulled Melissa behind a large filing cabinet, while Deborah slipped behind thick curtains. The door opened just as they concealed themselves. Richard entered, followed by the man with cold eyes. James, my friend Richard's voice dripped false concern. I'm worried about you. These questions you're asking, this obsession with old cases, it's not healthy. Not healthy for whom? Richard James's voice was deadly quiet. For the company, or for the murderers who've been using it as cover for decades. The man with cold eyes shifted, his hand moving toward his jacket. Richard raised a hand, stopping him. James, think of Melissa. Think of her future. Some truths are better left buried. Like you buried my wife's truth. James's composure cracked. Like you buried the Thompsons? Emma Walker? How many others, Richard? Your father understood business required. Difficult decisions. Richard's mask of concern slipped. Lucia couldn't accept that. She was going to expose everything, destroy what generations had built. We couldn't allow that. James's voice shook. You ordered her death. It was necessary. Richard sighed. Just like this is necessary. Marcel. The man with cold eyes. Marcel drew his weapon. But before he could aim, Michelle burst from hiding, tackling him with the fury of 20 years of waiting. The gun skittered across the floor. Deborah emerged next, swinging a heavy brass paperweight at Richard's head. He dodged, but the distraction gave James time to activate the office's emergency alarm. Daddy, Melissa's scream made everyone freeze. She stood in the doorway, a security guard's hand clamped on her shoulder. More men filed in behind them. It's over. James. Richard straightened his tie, smoothing his mask back into place. Now, let's discuss how this ends. Michelle, pinned by one of Richard's men, caught James's eye. In that moment, a lifetime of pain and determination passed between them. They had found the truth, but at what cost? The sound of approaching sirens broke the tension. Richard's smile faltered slightly. Shall we take this discussion somewhere more private? Bring the girl. But neither he nor his men noticed Deborah's hand sliding into her pocket, pressing send on a message that would change everything. The housekeeper's face was grim with satisfaction. Some secrets, she knew, were about to explode into the light. The tension in James Garcia's office crackled like electricity before a storm. Richard's men moved to escort them out, but Marcel's cold eyes never left Michelle. Recognition flickered there, the child who had escaped him 20 years ago, now a woman who threatened everything. The service elevator, Richard directed smoothly. We'll take this discussion somewhere more appropriate. Melissa, still held by the guard, caught Michelle's eye. The slight nod was imperceptible to others, but Michelle understood. They had practiced this, in quiet moments between ballet lessons and bedtime stories, what to do if the bad men ever came. As they moved into the hallway, Melissa suddenly went limp, dropping like a stone. The guard, startled, loosened his grip. In that split second, she rolled away, exactly as Michelle had taught her. Now, Michelle shouted. She drove her elbow back into her captor's solar plexus, twisting free. James lunged for Richard while Deborah, with strength born of maternal fury, swung her heavy handbag into Marcel's face. Run, James yelled, grappling with Richard. Get Melissa out. Michelle scooped up Melissa, but Marcel was already recovering, his cold eyes now blazing with rage. He reached for them, but Deborah appeared between them. A mother's protective instinct made flesh. Not another child, she snarled, pepper spray appearing from her apron pocket. Never again. Marcel's scream as the spray hit his eyes echoed through the corridor. Richard's other men hesitated, torn between helping their leaders and pursuing the escapees. The back stairs, Michelle called to James, who had pinned Richard against the wall. Meet us at the safe place." James nodded, understanding. They had planned for this too, in quiet conversations none of them had hoped would be necessary. Richard struggled, but James held firm. "You killed my wife," he growled. "You destroyed families. It ends today." Michelle, Melissa, and Deborah raced down the emergency stairwell, their footsteps echoing off concrete walls. Behind them, shouts and pounding feet announced their pursuers. "The garage connects to the subway tunnel," Deborah gasped as they ran. "Service entrance. I have the key." "How?" Michelle asked, adjusting her grip on Melissa. "Lucia showed me." For emergencies, Deborah's face was grim. She knew this day might come. They burst into the parking garage, the fluorescent lights harsh after the stairwell's dimness. Deborah led them to an unmarked door, her hands shaking as she fitted the key. "They're coming," Melissa whispered, her face buried in Michelle's shoulder. The door opened with a groan of disused hinges. Beyond it, a maintenance tunnel stretched into darkness. Deborah pulled out a flashlight, another part of her years-long preparation. "Wait," Michelle set Melissa down. "What about James?" "Daddy knows the way," Melissa said with certainty. "We practiced." The sound of the stairwell door crashing open made their decision for them. They plunged into the tunnel, Deborah leading with the flashlight, Michelle bringing up the rear, Melissa protected between them. Behind them, Marcel's voice echoed with murderous fury. "Find them. They don't leave this building alive." They ran through the darkness, the beam of Deborah's flashlight bouncing off damp walls. The tunnel seemed endless, each intersection a potentially fatal choice. "Left here," Melissa whispered. "Then 2 rights." Mummy's map showed the way. Michelle's heart clenched. Even in death, Lucia was protecting her daughter, guiding them to safety through her careful preparations. They emerged into a maintenance room of the subway station, the rumble of trains above them masking their gasping breaths. Deborah led them to a service elevator. Up to the platform she directed, then separate exits. "They can't follow all of us." No, Michelle and Melissa spoke together. Melissa continued, "We stay together. Like sisters." Deborah's face softened. "Like family." The elevator doors opened onto a crowded platform. They merged with the mass of commuters, just 3 more faces in the crowd. Through the sea of people, Michelle caught a glimpse of Marcel's cold eyes scanning the station. But he was looking for running figures, not for a calm woman holding a child's hand, accompanied by what appeared to be her mother. As a train pulled in, Michelle's phone vibrated a text from James' safe. "Evidence secure. Police on way. Get to the house." They boarded the train, hearts pounding but faces composed. As the doors closed, Marcel's frustrated roar was lost in the screech of wheels on rails. Melissa, sandwiched between Michelle and Deborah, finally allowed herself to smile. "We did it, just like Mom planned." Michelle hugged her close, meeting Deborah's eyes over the girl's head. They had escaped, yes, but this was just the beginning. The real battle for justice, for truth, for redemption still lay ahead. The safe house nestled in the outskirts of Austin was modest compared to the Garcia mansion, but as the sun set on their first evening there, it felt more like home than any place Michelle had known in 20 years. She sat on the back porch, watching Melissa practice her ballet moves on the small lawn while Deborah prepared dinner inside. "Your arabesque is getting stronger," Michelle called out, smiling as Melissa beamed with pride. In the week since their escape from Garcia Investments, the girl had thrown herself into dance with renewed passion. It was her way of processing everything that had happened, turning fear and confusion into graceful movement. "Mum used to dance too," Melissa said, twirling to face Michelle. "Did you know that?" Deborah found some old videos yesterday. Michelle patted the porch step beside her, and Melissa came to sit, their shoulders touching. "Tell me about the videos." She was beautiful. Like a bird flying across the stage, Melissa leaned into Michelle's side. "In one video, she's dancing while pregnant with me. Daddy's filming, and you can hear him laughing when she makes silly faces at the camera." Inside, they could hear James's voice mixing with Deborah's as they discussed security measures. He split his time between the safe house and maintaining appearances at the company, gathering evidence while pretending nothing was wrong. Each return brought new tension to his face, but also new determination. Melissa's voice had turned serious. "Are we really sisters?" The question caught Michelle off guard. "What makes you ask that?" "I found a picture in Mom's old dance album. She's standing with another dancer who looks just like you. And on the back, it says Lucia and Sarah Thompson sisters in dance, 1992. Michelle's heart stopped. "Sarah Thompson? You're sure that's what it said?" "Aha. Was that your mum?" Before Michelle could answer, Deborah appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Michelle, James, you need to see this." In the small living room, James stood before the television, remote clutched in his hand. A news report showed the First National Bank engulfed in flames. Still investigating the cause of the fire that destroyed the bank's safety deposit vault, the reporter was saying. While most contents were secured in the main vault, several boxes in the older section were completely destroyed, including box 247. "Lucia's evidence," James whispered, sinking into a chair. "They got to it first." But Michelle barely heard him. Her mind was spinning with Melissa's revelation. Her mother, Sarah Thompson, had danced with Lucia Garcia, had been friends with her. Was that why her father's store had been targeted? Why Lucia had investigated the fire years later? "James," she said slowly, "we need to see those dance videos." Hours later, after Melissa had been tucked into bed, the three adults sat surrounded by old photographs and VHS tapes converted to digital files. The image on the laptop screen was frozen on two young women in dance costumes, arms around each other, faces alight with joy. "They weren't just dance partners," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "Lucia talked about Sarah all the time when we first met. They grew up together in the dance academy. Sarah was the one who introduced us." "Then you knew my parents," Michelle's voice cracked. "I knew Sarah. David Thompson, your father, I only met a few times." James ran a hand through his hair. "When they died, Lucia was devastated. She started looking into the fire years later, after she found discrepancies in the company records. And that investigation led her to Emma's death," Deborah added quietly. "Everything's connected." Michelle stared at the frozen image of her mother and Lucia, so young, so unaware of the tragedy awaiting them. "We're not just fighting for justice anymore," she realized. "We're finishing what they started. Both of them." A small sound made them all turn. Melissa stood in the doorway in her pajamas, tears streaming down her face. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew you felt like family." Michelle opened her arms and Melissa ran into them. James moved to embrace them both, while Deborah watched with glistening eyes. "Your mom and my mom were like sisters," Melissa said into Michelle's shoulder. "That's why you understand me so well. That's why you came to protect us." "I didn't know," Michelle admitted, stroking Melissa's hair. "I was searching for justice, for answers about my parents' death. But finding this connection. Maybe this is what both our mothers wanted." "They're watching over us," Melissa said with certainty. "Mom and Aunt Sarah. They brought us together." James cleared his throat, emotion making his voice rough. "Michelle, I should have seen it sooner. You have Sarah's eyes, her determination. Lucia would have wanted you here, protecting Melissa, being the family we all needed." Deborah stood, moving to join their group embrace. "Family protects family," she said firmly. "And tomorrow we start fighting back. For Lucia, for Sarah, for Emma, for all of them. As they held each other in that safe house living room, surrounded by images of the past and strengthened by newly discovered bonds, they felt something shift. They were no longer just allies united by tragedy. They were family bound by love, loss, and an unshakable determination to see justice done. Later that night, as Michelle tucked Melissa into bed again, the girl whispered, "Will you tell me stories about my Aunt Sarah? About when she and Mom danced together?" Michelle kissed her forehead, feeling a warmth in her heart she'd thought lost forever. "Every story I can remember, little sister. Every single one." The morning headlines hit like bombs across Austin's business community. Garcia Investments under investigation. CEO James Garcia alleges decades of criminal activity. Richard Bennett's carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble. In his plush corner office, Richard stared at the newspaper, his manicured fingers leaving creases in the paper. Marcel stood by the window, his cold eyes scanning the street below where reporters gathered like vultures. "He's making his move," Richard said, voice tight with controlled fury. "After all I've done for him, for this company. The ungrateful son of A." "We should eliminate the problem," Marcel interrupted. "Like we did with his wife." No, Richard's smile was serpentine. "Death is too simple. I want him to lose everything, just like we made the Thompsons lose everything. Start with his reputation." Across town, James sat in Detective Sarah Marshall's office, spreading out documents salvaged from Lucia's research. The detective, no relation to the Thompsons but deeply invested in their case, listened intently. "These transfers," James pointed to a series of transactions, "they all trace back to offshore accounts controlled by Bennett Holdings. Every time a tragic accident occurred, money moved through these channels." Like clockwork, Marshall agreed, adding papers to her own extensive file. "The Thompson fire, Emma Walker's death, and at least 12 other incidents we've identified." James's phone buzzed. Another emergency board meeting called by Richard. "They're moving against me," he said, standing. "Watch the news." The Garcia Investments boardroom crackled with tension as James took his seat. Richard stood at the head of the table, his usual polished charm replaced by cold determination. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Richard began, "it pains me to bring this to your attention, but we've uncovered disturbing evidence of embezzlement and fraud. James Garcia has been systematically looting this company, using offshore accounts to hide his activities." Holders slid across the table doctored documents showing James's signature on fraudulent transactions. The same transactions he had just shown Detective Marshall, but twisted, altered to point to him instead of Richard. "This is absurd," James stood, his chair scraping back. "These documents are forgeries." "Are they?" Richard's voice dripped concern. "Or are you simply following in your father's footsteps? We all know how Garcia Sr. operated." The board members shifted uncomfortably. James's father's reputation had always been complicated, brilliant but ruthless, successful but feared. "A formal investigation will be launched," Richard continued. "In the meantime, I move for immediate suspension of James Garcia from all company operations." The vote was quick, brutal. Only 2 board members sided with James, old friends of Lucia's who had their own suspicions about her death. As security escorts arrived to remove him from the building, James caught Richard's triumphant smirk. But Richard didn't see James slip a small USB drive to Patricia Chen, one of the board members who had voted in his favor. Back at the safe house, Michelle and Deborah monitored multiple laptops, tracking the fallout. Melissa sat between them, her small face serious as she helped sort through her mother's old files. "They're trying to do to Daddy what they did to Michelle's parents," Melissa observed, showing wisdom beyond her years. "But this time we're ready," Michelle assured her, just as her phone chimed with a message from Patricia Chen. "It's done," she read aloud. "The files are uploading to the SEC server now. Richard won't be able to delete these." Deborah's laptop pinged with news alerts. Breaking whistleblower documents reveal decades of corporate corruption. Second board member comes forward with evidence against Bennett Holdings. FBI opens investigation into historic property acquisitions. James arrived home to find them gathered around the screens, watching Richard's empire begin to crack. Patricia came through. Michelle nodded. The evidence is public now. All of it. The Thompson fire, Emma's death, the other victims, everything Lucia discovered, everything we've gathered since. They can't bury it anymore. But their victory was short-lived. James's phone rang. Detective Marshall's voice was urgent. They're moving assets offshore. Richard's cleaning house. And James, we found documents in his private safe about Lucia. About the night she died. The room fell silent. Melissa gripped Michelle's hand as James put the phone on speaker. She wasn't killed at home, Marshall continued. They took her to the old Thompson Electronics building first. Made her watch as they destroyed the evidence she'd gathered. Marcel. He made it look like natural causes afterward. Melissa's small sob broke the silence. Michelle pulled her close while Deborah moved to stand protectively near them both. There's more. Marshall's voice was hesitant. The documents mentioned Sarah Thompson. She wasn't just Lucia's friend, she was helping her investigate. That's why they targeted the store. They knew she had evidence about Garcia Sr.'s early operations. The pieces clicked into place. Two friends, two mothers, both trying to expose the truth. Both silenced by the same men. They're running scared now, James said, his voice hard. Making mistakes. Moving too fast. Yes, Marshall agreed. But scared men are dangerous. Watch your backs, all of you. As if in response to her warning, a brick crashed through the safe house window, missing Melissa by inches. Attached was a note: you should have learned from your mother's mistakes. Deborah moved fastest, getting Melissa away from the windows while Michelle and James checked the perimeter. But the message was clear: the battle was far from over. We need to end this, Michelle said as they regrouped. Not just expose them, stop them completely. For our mothers. For Emma. For everyone they've hurt. James nodded grimly. Tomorrow, Richard hosts the annual shareholder meeting. Every major player will be there. So will the FBI, Deborah added, hanging up her own phone. Marshall's team is ready. Melissa, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke up. The Thompson building. That's where we'll find the truth. That's where Mum. She couldn't finish, but she didn't need to. The old electronics store where both Sarah Thompson and Lucia Garcia had faced their final moments, it was still standing. Abandoned but not forgotten. Tomorrow, then, Michelle said, holding Melissa close. We end this where it began. Dawn found the safe house divided by tension and fear. James paced the living room, his face drawn from another sleepless night. It's too dangerous. I won't risk Melissa losing anyone else. We're already involved, Michelle argued, her voice tight with frustration. Running won't protect her. It didn't protect our mothers, it didn't protect Emma. Deborah stood at the window, her hands methodically cleaning already spotless glass. Perhaps we should send Melissa to my sister's farm, just until. No, Melissa's shout startled them all. She stood in the doorway, still in her ballet pajamas, tears streaming down her face. You can't send me away, you can't split up our family. Not now. The adults exchanged guilty looks. In their attempts to protect her, they'd forgotten how much Melissa had already lost, how desperately she needed to keep her newfound family together. Sweetheart, James began, but Melissa cut him off. Mum died trying to protect us alone. Aunt Sarah died alone. Emma died alone. Her small voice carried the weight of understanding far beyond her years. We're stronger together. That's what you always tell me, right, Michelle? Michelle knelt before her newly discovered niece, seeing Sarah's determination in the girl's eyes. You're right, but your father's also right to be scared. We all are. Then be scared together, Melissa insisted. But don't send me away, please? James sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. The weight of leadership, of fatherhood, of vengeance and protection warred on his face. What would Lucia want, he whispered. She'd want the truth exposed, Deborah said quietly, but not at the cost of her daughter's safety. The truth is Melissa's safety, Michelle countered, moving to sit beside James. As long as Richard and Marcel are free, she'll never be truly safe. None of us will be. Silence fell as they all absorbed this reality. Finally, Deborah spoke, her voice carrying years of buried pain. When Emma died, I chose to stay quiet, to keep my head down and protect Melissa instead. Every day I wonder if my silence helped them hurt other families. It wasn't your fault, James said quickly, but Deborah shook her head. No, but my fear was their weapon, just like they're using our fear now. She touched her ever-present locket. Emma would want us to fight. Melissa moved to hug Deborah, understanding the housekeeper's pain in a way only those who've lost mothers can. We'll fight for Emma too. Michelle watched them, feeling the weight of her own choices pressing down. When I first came here, I was focused only on revenge. On finding my parents' killers, she met James's eyes. I never expected to find family, to love Melissa as my own. Now I'm torn between wanting justice and wanting to take her far away where no one can hurt her. That's what makes us different from them, James said softly. We feel, we love, we struggle with these choices. A notification pinged on Michelle's laptop, more news about Richard's financial maneuvering. The screen showed him leaving Garcia Investments, his usual smooth confidence replaced by barely contained rage. He's losing control, Michelle observed, making mistakes, which makes him more dangerous, James countered. But also more vulnerable, Deborah added, years of watching and waiting evident in her voice. Melissa, still in Deborah's arms, spoke up again. Mom's ballet teacher used to say that when you're most scared of falling, that's when you have to dance your hardest. The simple wisdom of her words cut through their adult complexities. They were all terrified of loss, of failure, of watching another loved one die. But that fear could either paralyze them or push them to act. So we dance, Michelle said, understanding dawning. We move forward together, supporting each other even though we're scared. Like a ballet, Melissa nodded enthusiastically. Everyone has their part, but the whole dance only works if we trust each other. James stood, drawing strength from his daughter's certainty. Then we need to choreograph our finale very carefully. Richard's shareholders' meeting is in 10 hours. The Thompson building. He paused, pain crossing his face. Where Lucia died. That's our stage. Our mothers will be watching, Michelle said softly to Melissa, guiding us through this last dance. Deborah straightened her shoulders, years of protective instinct shifting into offensive determination. Then let's make it a performance they'd be proud of. Looking at each other, the grieving widower, the vengeful daughter, the protective housekeeper, and the child who bound them all together, they felt their individual fears and conflicts merging into shared purpose. Together, Melissa said firmly, holding out her small hand. One by one, they placed their hands over hers. Together they echoed, sealing their pact. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting their joined shadows on the wall, no longer separate silhouettes, but one united shape, moving forward into whatever darkness awaited. The abandoned Thompson Electronics building loomed against the darkening sky, its broken windows like blind eyes watching their approach. Michelle felt her heart race as they parked a block away, memories of flames and screams threatening to overwhelm her. Marcel's car is here, James whispered, pointing to a black sedan partially hidden behind the building. And Richard's town car just pulled up front. Detective Marshall's voice crackled through their earpieces. FBI teams are in position. Remember, we need them to incriminate themselves. Get them talking. Deborah touched her locket, her face set with determination. "The security cameras are looped. They won't see us coming." "Be careful," Melissa pleaded from the back seat, where she would stay with a trusted officer, her small face pressed against the window, trying to memorize their features in case. No one finished that thought. Michelle checked her wire one last time, then hugged Melissa tightly. "Remember what we practiced, if anything happens." "Emergency phone, safe word, run to the meeting point," Melissa recited. "Don't wait, don't look back." James kissed his daughter's forehead, lingering for a moment. "I love you, sweetheart. Your mother would be so proud of how brave you are." They split up according to plan, James taking the front entrance, Michelle the back, Deborah covering the side exit. The building's interior was a maze of shadows and memories. Michelle could almost see her father's store as it had been bright displays, happy customers, her mother's laugh echoing through the aisles. She moved silently through the darkness, hearing voices ahead. Richard's cultured tones carried clearly everything's in place. Once the shareholders vote, the company's assets will be safely offshore. Let them investigate, they'll find nothing. And Garcia Marcel's cold voice made Michelle's skin crawl. A tragic accident. Like his wife. Like the Thompsons. Like poor little Emma Walker. Michelle froze as Deborah's sharp intake of breath came through the earpiece. They hadn't known for certain that Richard had ordered Emma's death. "Speaking of accidents," Marcel said, "we have company." The lights suddenly blazed on, temporarily blinding Michelle. When her vision cleared, she found herself facing Marcel's gun. "The prodigal Thompson returns," Richard smiled, but his eyes were hard. "And James, how kind of you to join us, though I don't see little Melissa. Surely you didn't leave her unprotected." James emerged from the shadows, hands raised. "It's over, Richard. The FBI has everything, the offshore accounts, the murder orders, all of it." "They have nothing," Richard snapped. "Everything was destroyed in the bank fire." "Not everything," Deborah's voice rang out as she stepped into view. "Emma saw you that night, Richard. Saw you order Marcel to set the fire. She told me right before." "Unfortunate," Richard shrugged. "Children should be more careful about what they witness." "Like Melissa witnessed you watching Lucia that night," Michelle challenged. "Like I witnessed Marcel killing my parents." Something flickered in Richard's eyes. "You're just like your mother, Michelle." "Sarah never knew when to stay quiet either." "Tell me why," James demanded. "Why kill Lucia? Why destroy so many lives?" "Our James, your father understood that. Building an empire requires sacrifices." Richard's smile turned cruel. "Lucia was going to expose everything. Sarah Thompson had evidence of your father's early methods. Emma Walker was simply collateral damage." And now Marcel's finger tightened on the trigger. "Now we clean up loose ends." "All of them," Richard nodded. "Start with the Thompson girl. Let's finish what we started 20 years ago." "I don't think so," Detective Marshall's voice boomed through the building. "FBI, drop your weapons." Agents swarmed in from every entrance, but Marcel was too quick. He grabbed Michelle, using her as a shield, his gun pressed to her temple. "One step and she dies," he shouted. "Just like her parents." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. A small figure darted through the chaos, Melissa, who had slipped away from the officer. "Let my aunt go," she screamed, running straight at Marcel. Multiple voices shouted no. Richard reached for his own weapon. Marcel's grip loosened in surprise. Michelle drove her elbow back, just as she'd taught Melissa. The gun clattered away. Shots rang out. Richard fell, clutching his shoulder where Marshall's bullet had struck. Marcel lunged for Melissa, but Deborah appeared like an avenging angel, her heavy bag catching him full in the face. "Not another child," she snarled as he went down. "Never again." Agents swarmed the fallen men. James grabbed Melissa, shielding her eyes from the scene. Michelle stood shaking until her niece's small hand found hers. "You're safe now," Melissa whispered. "We all are." As Richard and Marcel were led away in handcuffs, their protests drowned out by Miranda rights, the family huddled together. Through the broken windows, dawn was breaking over Austin, a new day, a new beginning. "Lucia would be proud," Deborah said softly, watching Richard's defeat. "Sarah too." "They're always proud of us," Melissa said with certainty. "They helped us win." Looking at the first rays of sun streaming through the windows where flames had once raged, Michelle felt 20 years of pain finally begin to ease. They had faced their hidden threats, confronted their demons, and emerged stronger together. The ghosts of the past could finally rest. Justice had been served, not through revenge, but through truth and family united. Victory had made them careless. As they drove back to the safe house from the Thompson building, none of them noticed the unmarked van following at a distance. None of them saw Marcel's last text before his arrest burn it all. The first sign something was wrong was the smoke-thin wisps curling from under the safe house door. Michelle noticed first, her trauma-sharpened instincts screaming danger. "Stop!" she shouted as James reached for the door handle. "It's hot! They've been here!" Inside, flames were already consuming the living room, racing up the walls where Melissa's drawings hung, devouring the evidence they'd gathered. The fire moved with unnatural speed, fed by accelerants placed with professional precision. "The back door," James yelled, but smoke was billowing from that direction too. They were surrounded by flames, just as Michelle's family had been 20 years ago, just as Emma had been. Melissa clutched Michelle's hand, her small face brave despite her terror. "Like Mom's last night," she whispered. "No," Michelle said firmly. "Not like that. We're together this time." Deborah was already moving, her years of preparing for disaster kicking in. The emergency ladder. Melissa's window. They raced upstairs, the heat pursuing them like a living thing. The smoke was thickening, making it hard to see, hard to breathe. James carried Melissa, while Michelle and Deborah grabbed what crucial evidence they could. In Melissa's room, the temperature was rising rapidly. The window stuck warped by heat or sabotage, they couldn't tell. James and Michelle threw their weight against it together as flames began licking under the door. Move! Deborah appeared with Melissa's ballot trophy, smashing the window. Fresh air rushed in, feeding the fire behind them but offering escape. The emergency ladder was there, but it was already starting to smoke. The heat had weakened its supports. "It won't hold all of us," James realized, testing its strength. "Melissa first," Michelle said, helping the girl onto the ladder. Deborah steadied it from inside as Melissa began her descent. Halfway down, one of the rungs gave way. Melissa screamed but held on. The ladder swayed dangerously. "Jump," Michelle called. "I'll catch you." Without hesitation, trusting her aunt completely, Melissa let go. Michelle caught her, both of them tumbling onto the grass but safe. Above them, the ladder completely detached from the house. James and Deborah were trapped. The sheets Deborah was already stripping Melissa's bed, like we practiced. They worked quickly, knotting sheets and blankets together as the fire closed in. The makeshift rope barely reached halfway down. "It's not long enough," James coughed, the smoke getting thicker. "Jump for the tree," Michelle called up. "The big branch, it's close enough." Deborah went first, years of household work having made her stronger than she looked. She swung on the sheet rope, kicked off the wall, and caught the branch. It bent but held. James was last, the fire now visible through the doorway behind him. As he gripped the sheets, an explosion from below rocked the house. Dad, Melissa screamed as James lost his grip. But Michelle was already moving, positioning herself under his fall. They crashed together, the impact knocking the breath from both of them, but they were alive. They stumbled away from the burning house, watching as their temporary sanctuary became an inferno. Fire trucks wailed in the distance, but they knew this fire was meant to destroy evidence, not property. "Your mother's videos," Melissa said softly to Michelle. "The pictures of Mom and Aunt Sarah dancing." "We have something better." Michelle hugged her close. "We have their story. We have each other." Deborah touched her locket, now slightly scorched but intact. "Emma always loved watching the dancers," she said quietly. "She would have loved watching you, Melissa." James pulled them all into a tight embrace as they watched the flames climb higher. "They tried to use fire to destroy us again," he said. "But this time it made us stronger." Detective Marshall's car screeched to a halt beside them. "Marshall's men," she reported grimly. "We caught them 2 blocks away. They had the whole thing timed." "They wanted to finish what they started," Michelle said, looking at the flames that were so like the ones that had taken her parents. Full circle. But this time was different. This time they had faced the fire together. This time they had all survived. Melissa tugged at Michelle's sleeve, pointing at the rising sun. Through the smoke and chaos, a ray of light broke through, casting their shadows on the ground 4 figures, standing tall, unbroken. "Look," she said. "We're still dancing." In that moment, watching the fire fail to destroy their newfound family, they all felt it, the presence of those they'd lost, standing with them in the dawn light. Lucia and Sarah, forever sisters in dance. Emma, the child who saw too much. All of them watching over this new family, forged in fire but never broken by it. The scene at Garcia Investments was chaos. News of Richard's arrest had spread like wildfire, and his loyalists were frantically destroying evidence. Detective Marshall's team had secured the main entrances, but the building was 20 stories of potential crime scenes. "The archive room," James said urgently as they rushed through the lobby. "Richard's personal safe, there has to be more evidence there." They split up again, James and Marshall taking the executive floor, Michelle and Deborah heading for archives, while Melissa stayed safely with a trusted officer in the security room, monitoring cameras. The archive room was dark when Michelle and Deborah entered, but something felt wrong. Papers scattered the floor, drawers hung open, and the painting of Garcia Sr. had been slashed. "Someone's been here," Deborah whispered, but her words were cut short by a movement in the shadows. 3 of Marcel's men emerged, armed and desperate. The Thompson girl, one sneered. "Boss said you'd come back here." Michelle pushed Deborah behind her, scanning for escape routes. "You're too late. Richard and Marcel are already in custody." "But then we've got nothing to lose," another man advanced. "Boss's last orders were clear, no loose ends." Through their earpieces, they heard Melissa's frightened voice. "Michelle, Deborah, 2 more are coming up the back stairs." But the warning came too late. The door burst open, trapping them between 2 groups of armed men. "Your mothers should have taught you to mind your own business," the first man taunted. "Both Thompson and Garcia women always sticking their noses where they don't belong." Michelle felt Deborah tense behind her. Then, incredibly, the housekeeper began to laugh. "What's so funny, old woman?" one man demanded. "You really don't know who you're dealing with, do you?" Deborah's voice was steel. "I've spent 15 years preparing for this moment, ever since Emma died." Her hand moved to her cleaning cart, and suddenly the room filled with industrial-strength cleaning spray. The men staggered, cursing and rubbing their eyes. Michelle didn't hesitate. She launched herself at the nearest attacker, years of self-defense training taking over. Deborah swung her cart like a battering ram, catching another man in the knees. "Security team," moving in, Melissa's voice came through their earpieces. "Hold on." But the remaining men were recovering. One grabbed Michelle's arm, twisting it painfully. Another seized Deborah's cart, sending cleaning supplies scattering. Then James's voice roared from the doorway, "Get away from my family." He charged in, Marshall and her team right behind him. In the chaos that followed, Michelle broke free, immediately moving to protect Deborah. The safe, Marshall shouted over the sound of combat. "Get to the safe!" Michelle spotted it behind the slash painting exposed now, its door slightly ajar. She lunged for it just as one of Marcel's men reached for it too. Their hands met at the safe. He was stronger, but Michelle had 20 years of determination behind her. They grappled, documents spilling onto the floor. Deborah, catch! Michelle managed to grab a handful of papers, throwing them behind her as she fought. The housekeeper snatched them mid-air, immediately beginning to read. Her eyes widened. Oh my God, Emma, she did see everything. These are Marcel's original orders, signed by Richard. Kill them all, one of the men screamed, breaking free from the agents. But he never reached them. James appeared like an avenging angel, tackling him to the ground. Not my family, he growled. Never again. The fight was brutal but brief. When it ended, Marcel's men lay subdued, and the safe's contents were secure in Marshall's evidence bags. Daddy Melissa's voice came through their earpieces. There's smoke on the 15th floor. They tried to burn the backup servers. On it, Marshall was already moving, organizing her team. But Michelle noticed something else in the safe, a small USB drive marked LG. Final message. James, she called softly. I think Lucia left something for you. They gathered around a laptop in the security room, Melissa climbing into her father's lap as Lucia Garcia's face appeared on screen. She looked tired, worried, but determined. James, my love, she began. If you're watching this, they found out what I discovered. The Thompson fire wasn't an accident. Sarah, my dear friend Sarah, she and David found proof of the company's criminal activities. That's why they were killed. And now I found evidence of so many others. Melissa pressed closer to her father as her mother's voice continued, watch over our daughter. And if by some miracle Michelle Thompson survived, tell her I'm so sorry I couldn't save her parents. Tell her Sarah was the sister I never had by blood but always had by heart. Michelle felt tears rolling down her cheeks as Deborah squeezed her shoulder. The truth is, in the archives, Lucia continued, behind my father-in-law's portrait. Richard won't think to look there. He never believed a woman would dare to challenge him. But I do dare. For Sarah, for all the families they've destroyed. The video ended with Lucia looking straight into the camera. Remember, my loves, the greatest dance is the one we perform together, even when we can no longer see our partners. Melissa wiped her eyes, looking at her newfound family, her father, her aunt, her protective Deborah. We finished Mom's dance, she said softly. We did it together. The sound of sirens faded as fire crews contained the server room blaze. Another attempt at destruction thwarted. Another fire that failed to break them. They had survived. They had rescued not just evidence, but truth itself, and in doing so they had rescued each other. The holding cell at Austin Police Department was a far cry from Richard Bennett's usual luxurious surroundings. He sat ramrod straight on the metal bench, his expensive suit wrinkled, his carefully cultivated image cracking around the edges. Across from him, separated by reinforced glass, sat James, Michelle, and Detective Marshall. Melissa had begged to come, but they'd all agreed some confrontations weren't for children's eyes. I must say Richard's voice carried its usual smooth condescension. This is all very dramatic, but ultimately futile. You have no concrete evidence that would stand up in court. Actually, Marshall laid out the documents from the archive safe. We have everything. Marcel's already talking, trying to make a deal. Something flickered in Richard's eyes, the first crack in his facade. Marcel is a desperate man making desperate claims. Like the claim that you ordered him to kill my parents, Michelle leaned forward, or the order to murder Emma Walker. Or how about Lucia's murder? Tragic accidents, all of them. Richard's smile was cold, just like the fire at your safe house today. Terrible things happen in this world, my dear. James slammed his hand against the glass, making Richard flinch. Stop playing games, Richard. We have your signature on the orders. We have the offshore accounts. We have Lucia's video testimony. And that got his attention. Video. She was always smarter than you gave her credit for, James continued. Just like Sarah Thompson was. Just like all the women you underestimated. Richard's composure slipped further. Your father understood business, James. He knew that building an empire required sacrifices. But my father was wrong. James's voice was steel. And so were you. Those weren't sacrifices, they were murders. My wife, Michelle's parents, Emma. All of them murdered to protect your greed. Greed? Richard stood suddenly, his mask finally cracking completely. You call building the most powerful company in Texas greed? Your father and I started with nothing. We took what we wanted because we were strong enough to take it. You killed my mother. Michelle's voice cut through his rant. You killed Aunt Lucia. You tried to kill us today. That's not strength, that's cowardice. Aunt Lucia. Richard's laugh was ugly. Oh, this is rich. You actually think you're family now? A little street rat playing house with the mighty Garcias. Sarah Thompson and Lucia Garcia were like sisters. Marshall interrupted, laying down a photograph of the two young dancers, which makes Michelle Melissa's aunt by every measure that matters. And that's what you never understood, James added quietly. Family isn't about power or empire building. It's about love, protection, truth. Truth, Richard spat the word. Truth is what the powerful decide it is. Your father knew that. Lucia forgot it, and look what happened to her. The confession hung in the air between them. Richard's eyes widened as he realized what he'd said. Thank you, Marshall said calmly, pressing stop on the recording device. That's exactly what we needed. Richard lunged at the glass, all pretense of sophistication gone. You set me up. You little witch, he snarled at Michelle. Just like your mother, thinking you're so clever. I should have made sure you died in that fire with her. But I didn't die. Michelle stood, her voice steady. I survived. I found my family. And now, together, we've ended you. Guards, Marshall called, and officers appeared to restrain the now raging Richard. This isn't over, he shouted as they dragged him away. You think you're safe? There are others. The empire doesn't die with me. When his screams had faded, James pulled Michelle into a tight hug. You okay? She nodded against his shoulder. For the first time in 20 years. Yes, I think I am. Marshall gathered her files, her face satisfied. The DA is ready to proceed with charges. Multiple counts of murder, conspiracy, fraud. He'll never see the outside of a prison again. And Marshall, James asked, singing like a canary. Between his testimony, the archived documents, and Richard's confession just now, we've got them all. They emerged from the police station into bright sunlight. Across the street, Deborah waited with Melissa by the car. The girl broke away as soon as she saw them, running to embrace her father and aunt. Is it over? She asked, looking up at them with hopeful eyes. Michelle and James exchanged glances. Richard's last threat hung between them. There are others. The empire doesn't die with me. But looking at Melissa's trust, at Deborah's protective stance, at James's determined face, Michelle knew they could handle whatever came next, together. The worst is over, she told her niece, choosing her words carefully. And we'll face anything else as a family. Melissa nodded solemnly, like Mom and Aunt Sarah would want. But exactly like they would want, Deborah agreed, joining their group. Now, shall we go home? Home, Not the burned safe house or the toxic Garcia mansion, but somewhere new, somewhere they could build fresh memories untainted by the past. As they drove away, Michelle caught a last glimpse of Richard being led to a prisoner transport van. He had tried to destroy so many families, but in doing so he had inadvertently created a stronger one. 1 month after Richard's arrest, the Garcia family stood before the rebuilt Thompson Electronics store. The old building had been transformed, its dark history cleansed by fresh paint and new purpose. The sign above the door read Thompson Garcia Dance Academy. "Are you sure about this, James?" asked Michelle, watching Melissa twirl excitedly on the sidewalk in her ballet shoes. Sarah and Lucia met through dance. Michelle smiled, touching the newly installed plaque commemorating their mothers. "It seems right to honor that connection." Deborah adjusted the flowers beneath the plaque, where students had already begun leaving their own tributes. The story of the dancing sisters, one by blood, one by choice, had captured the community's imagination. "The first class starts today," Melissa announced proudly. She had been instrumental in designing the studio, insisting on floor-to-ceiling mirrors so our angels can watch us dance. Inside, the space bore no resemblance to the electronics store where Michelle's parents had died, nor to the tomb where Lucia had faced her killers. Instead, sunlight streamed through high windows, catching the dust motes like falling stars. The main studio's walls featured photographs of Sarah and Lucia in various performances, their joy eternally preserved. "Emma would have loved this," Deborah said softly, touching her locket. In the corner, a small memorial garden honored all the victims of Richard's crimes. Emma's ballet shoes, bronzed, held pride of place among the flowers. The first students began arriving, young girls in leotards full of dreams and energy. Among them were children from the local orphanage, attending on scholarships established in Sarah Thompson's name. "Miss Michelle," they called, running to hug their teacher. "Miss Michelle, will you tell us the story again?" She caught James's eye, saw his slight nod. The children needed to know not the dark details, but the truth about courage, about family, about love stronger than fear. "Once upon a time," Michelle began, gathering them in a circle, "there were 2 dancers who became sisters not through blood, but through love." As she spoke, Melissa demonstrated the dance moves from the story, her small body expressing all the emotion words couldn't capture. When she reached the part about the fire, one of the orphanage girls asked, "Weren't you scared?" "Very scared," Michelle admitted. "But I wasn't alone. Sometimes the bravest dance we can perform is the one we dance together." Detective Marshall arrived as the story ended, carrying a stack of official-looking documents. "It's done," she announced quietly to the adults. "The last of Richard's hidden accounts have been seized. The money will go to a victims' compensation fund." James nodded gravely, and Marcel accepted the plea deal. 25 years in exchange for testifying against Richard's remaining associates. She paused. They found 3 more cases, similar to the Thompsons. Cold cases from the early days. Michelle felt her heart clench, thinking of other families destroyed by greed and power. But then Melissa grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the studio floor. "Dance with me, Aunt Michelle. Like our mums used to." The other students joined in, begging for a demonstration. Even Deborah smiled, remembering how Emma used to beg the same way. As Michelle took position beside her niece, she caught their reflection in the mirror: dark hair, determined eyes, the same graceful strength that had marked both Sarah and Lucia. For a moment she could almost see them there, dancing alongside. "Ready?" she asked Melissa. The girl nodded, her face shining. Together. They began to move, their shadows merging on the polished floor. The other children watched in awe as aunt and niece told their family story through dance, not the tragedy, but the triumph. The love that survived fire, the truth that outlasted lies, the bonds that grew stronger through adversity. James watched from the doorway, his eyes misty. Beside him, Deborah dabbed at her own tears with her ever-present handkerchief. Detective Marshall stayed to watch, understanding that this moment was as much a part of justice as any court verdict. When the dance ended, the children burst into applause. More parents were arriving, bringing more students, more stories waiting to be told through movement and music. "Mum would be proud," Melissa said, hugging Michelle tightly. "Both our mums would be proud." Michelle looked around at their newly forged family James, finding strength to lead with compassion Deborah, channeling her grief into protecting others Melissa, carrying both Sarah and Lucia's legacy forward with each graceful step. The morning sun painted patterns on the dance floor, like flames but gentle now, healing rather than destroying. They had transformed a place of tragedy into one of joy, turning darkness into light, just as they had transformed their own broken pieces into something beautiful and whole. "Yes," Michelle agreed, holding her niece close. "They're proud of all of us." And somewhere, in the shimmer of sunlight on mirrors, two sisters danced on. The call came at midnight, jolting James from his fitful sleep. Detective Marshall's voice was tense. "They've escaped. Richard and Marcel. There's a mole in the department." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. James rushed to check on Melissa, finding her safe in bed, Michelle already standing guard at her door. How Michelle demanded when he relayed the news, her face pale in the darkness. "Inside help," James said grimly. "Someone high up in the police department was on Richard's payroll." Deborah appeared silently, her usual calm shattered. "It's worse. The evidence from the archive safe, it's gone. All of it. The betrayal cut deep. All their careful work, their gathered proof, the testimonies vanished. But the real blow came with Marshall's next words, the mole. It's Patricia Chen. She's been working for Richard all along." Patricia, the board member who had seemed to help them, who had gained their trust, who had access to everything. She was there that night Melissa's small voice made them all turn. She stood in her doorway, clutching her mother's dance photo. When Mum died. I remember now. She brought Mum tea. The implications hit like physical blows. Patricia hadn't just betrayed them, now she had helped kill Lucia. Had probably helped orchestrate every death, every fire, every accident that had destroyed so many lives. The dance academy, Michelle realized with horror. All those children. James was already moving. "Get Melissa out. Now." They rushed downstairs, but Patricia was waiting in the living room, Richard's cold smile on her face. "Going somewhere." Behind her, Marcel emerged from the shadows, his eyes gleaming with anticipated revenge. More men filed in through the back door. They were surrounded. "You know, Patricia's voice was conversational. Lucia never suspected me. Her trusted friend, her confidante. It was so easy to slip the poison into her tea, to make it look like natural causes." Why, James's voice cracked. "We trusted you." "Because power requires loyalty, James. Your father understood that. Richard rewards loyalty." Generously, she pulled out a gun. "Unfortunately, your family has a habit of asking too many questions." Like Emma did, Deborah stepped forward, her face twisted with grief and rage. "Was it you who told them she saw something?" Patricia's smile faltered slightly. "Children should learn to mind their own business." "You won't hurt another child," Michelle moved to shield Melissa. "Oh, but we will." Richard himself stepped into the room, immaculate despite his prison break. "We're going to finish what we started. The Thompson line ends tonight, and this time, James, you'll watch your daughter die, just as David Thompson watched his family burn." The betrayal was complete. Their safe haven compromised, their evidence destroyed, their trust shattered. They stood together, a family forged in fire, facing the flames once again. But this time was different. This time they saw the betrayal coming. This time they had a plan. Because while Patricia had been watching them, they had been watching her. While she thought she was destroying evidence, Detective Marshall had been building a separate case. And while Richard thought he was free, he was walking into a trap 20 years in the making. Still, looking at the guns pointed at her family, Michelle felt the weight of history threatening to repeat itself. Would they lose everything again? Would Patricia's betrayal cost them as dearly as it had cost Lucia? Melissa's small hand found hers in the darkness, squeezing once their secret signal. "Ready?" The real question was, were Richard and his conspirators ready for what came next? Time seemed to freeze in that moment. Guns aimed, betrayals revealed, a family surrounded. But then Melissa did something none of them expected. She stepped forward, her small face calm despite the danger. "Aunt Patricia," she said clearly, "Mom left something for you." Patricia's hand wavered slightly. "What are you talking about?" In her last video, the one you didn't find, Melissa's voice carried an eerie certainty. She knew it was you. She knew it was you. She knew all along. The color drained from Patricia's face. Richard snapped, "She's bluffing. Kill them all." But Melissa continued, her voice carrying her mother's strength. "She said to tell you that she saw you that night at the Thompson store. She saw what really happened to Aunt Sarah." Patricia's gun dropped an inch. "That's impossible." She was. Taking dance photos, Michelle stepped forward, understanding dawning. No, she was documenting everything. Every meeting, every transaction. She had 2 cameras that night, one for dance, one for truth. "The second camera," Patricia whispered. "We never found it." "Because she gave it to me," Deborah spoke up. "Her trusted housekeeper, the one person you all overlooked." Richard's composure cracked. "Kill them. Now." But his men hesitated. Through the windows, red and blue lights began flashing. Detective Marshall's voice boomed through a megaphone. "The house is surrounded. All units move in." What happened next unfolded like a deadly dance. Patricia, panicked, swung her gun toward Melissa. Michelle moved without thinking, throwing herself forward. James lunged for Richard as Marshall raised his weapon. The gunshot echoed through the room. Patricia stumbled back, staring at her shoulder where Marshall's sniper's bullet had struck. Her gun clattered to the floor as FBI teams crashed through windows and doors. No, Richard reached for his own weapon, but James was faster. 20 years of suppressed rage fueled his punch, laying Richard out cold. Marshall managed one shot before being taken down, the bullet grazing Michelle's arm. But she barely felt it, focused only on getting to Melissa. The girl stood unharmed in the chaos, protected by Deborah's body. The housekeeper had shielded her, just as she couldn't shield Emma years ago. "It's over." Marshall strode in, surveying the scene. "We got them all, including Judge Harrison and 3 other conspirators." Patricia's confession triggered a domino effect. They're all turning on each other. As Richard and his conspirators were led away in handcuffs, Melissa ran to hug Michelle, her small body trembling now that the danger had passed. "How did you know?" Michelle asked softly. "About the camera." "I didn't," Melissa admitted. "But I remembered what you taught me. Sometimes the best defense is making them think you know their secrets." James gathered them both close, his eyes wet. "You're so much like your mother, both of you." Deborah touched her locket, now containing 2 pictures, Emma and Melissa. "We all did what our loved ones couldn't. We stood together." The house, no longer safe but still standing, creaked around them as dawn approached. They were battered but unbroken, their family bonds stronger than any betrayal. Patricia's last words as she was led away echoed strangely. "I never wanted this. Lucia was my friend. But power changes everything." "No," Melissa said firmly, watching her former aunt taken away. "Love changes everything. That's what Mom always said." Looking at their unlikely family, the grieving father, the avenging daughter, the protective housekeeper, the lost girl who found her way home. They knew Lucia had been right. Love had changed everything. Love had given them the strength to face betrayal, to risk everything, to protect each other when the world fell apart. The sun rose on a new day, painting the room where they had nearly lost everything in gentle gold. They held each other close, understanding that while the tragedy of betrayal had touched them, it had not broken them. The Thompson Garcia Dance Academy stood silent in the early morning light, its windows still dark, its doors locked since the night of betrayal. Inside, dust had settled on the mirrors where young dancers once twirled, their dreams temporarily suspended by violence and fear. Michelle stood before the academy's entrance, her arm in a sling from Marcel's bullet. Beside her, Melissa held a single key, the key to reopening not just a building, but hope itself. "Are you sure we're ready?" James asked softly, his own bruises from the fight with Richard still healing. Deborah adjusted her ever-present locket, now containing 3 pictures: Emma, Melissa, and a newly added photo of all of them together. The children keep asking when they can return. They miss their sanctuary. Melissa stepped forward, inserting the key with determined hands. Mom and Aunt Sarah wouldn't want their dance studio to stay dark. Neither would Emma. The door swung open, releasing the stale air of abandonment. Their footsteps echoed as they entered, memories of that terrible night still fresh. Patricia's betrayal had shaken them all, but especially James, who had trusted her with his company, his family, his wife's memory. "The security system is upgraded," Detective Marshall said, joining them inside. "We've vetted all the staff, all the families. No one gets in without thorough background checks." But security measures couldn't heal the deeper wounds: the loss of trust, the shattering of innocence, the knowledge that evil could wear a friendly face. Melissa walked to the center of the main studio, her reflection multiplied in the dusty mirrors. Without warning, she began to dance not a formal routine, but something raw and real, expressing what words couldn't. One by one, they watched as she moved through her grief, her fear, her determination to reclaim this space. Her dance spoke of betrayal, but also of resilience, of family forged stronger through fire. "She's dancing their story," Deborah whispered, tears in her eyes. All of them: Lucia, Sarah, Emma. Michelle moved to join her niece, her injured arm forgotten as muscle memory took over. Together, aunt and niece created a new dance of healing, their shadows merging on the floor like past and present embracing. James watched, remembering how Lucia used to dance away her troubles, how she believed in the power of movement to heal broken spirits. Even in her final video, she had spoken of life as a dance complex, sometimes painful, but beautiful in its continuity. "The first class back," Melissa announced, ending her impromptu performance, "should be about trust, about catching each other when we fall." The wisdom in her words struck them all. Recovery wasn't just about heightened security or protective measures. It was about learning to trust again, about refusing to let betrayal dim their light. Detective Marshall nodded approvingly. "You're rebuilding something important here. Not just a dance studio, but faith in human connection." They spent the day cleaning, erasing the physical traces of abandonment while acknowledging that some marks couldn't be wiped away. But perhaps they shouldn't be. Perhaps the scars were part of their story now. As sunlight began streaming through freshly washed windows, they heard voices outside. Their students had gathered, holding handmade signs: "We miss our dance family and love is stronger than fear." Melissa ran to open the door, letting in a flood of young dancers and their parents. The studio filled with life again, with laughter, with movement, with hope. "See," Melissa said to Michelle, watching the children warm up. "We're still dancing." Patricia and Richard couldn't stop the music. Michelle hugged her niece close, understanding that recovery wasn't a destination but a journey, a complex choreography of healing, forgiveness, and moving forward together. The Academy's plaque caught the morning light, Sarah and Lucia's names gleaming. Below it, they'd added a new inscription: "Where every fall leads to a stronger rise," and every dance tells a story of survival. They had survived betrayal. Now it was time to dance again. The courtroom fell silent as Detective Marshall wheeled in the evidence cart boxes of documents, hard drives, and most damning of all, Lucia's missing camera. Patricia Chen, handcuffed at the defendant's table, visibly flinched at the sight of it. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, "the state would like to present evidence that has been sealed until this moment, recovered from a safety deposit box registered to Lucia Garcia." Richard Bennett, sitting with his own legal team, maintained his composed facade, but his fingers drummed nervously on the table. Marcel, separated from his former boss, stared straight ahead, his cold eyes finally showing a glimmer of fear. James sat in the front row, Melissa on one side, Michelle on the other. Deborah sat directly behind them, her hand resting protectively on Melissa's shoulder. They watched as the prosecutor approached with the camera. "This device," she explained, "contains photographic evidence from the night Sarah Thompson died, evidence that Mrs. Garcia carefully preserved, knowing her own life was in danger." The screen lit up with the first image: Richard and Patricia meeting David Thompson in his store. The timestamp matched the night of the fire. More photos followed: Marcel receiving instructions, men placing accelerants, Patricia keeping watch. "Mom was there," Michelle whispered, gripping James's hand. She saw everything. The next series of photos showed Sarah Thompson discovering them, her confrontation with Patricia, her desperate attempt to call the police. The final image, taken through a window, captured Patricia holding Sarah at gunpoint while Marcel prepared the fire. Patricia's composure cracked. "That's not possible. We checked everywhere." Mrs. Garcia had a second camera, Marshall testified. While appearing to take dance photos for the studio's opening, she documented everything. She knew someone inside the company was helping Richard, but she wasn't sure who until that night. More evidence followed: financial records showing Patricia's payoffs, surveillance footage of her poisoning Lucia's tea, recordings of conversations planning Emma Walker's death. The web of deceit spanning 20 years unraveled in the harsh light of truth. "But perhaps most damning," the prosecutor continued, "is this." She played a video clip, Lucia's final recording, made the night before her death. The courtroom watched in silence as Lucia spoke directly to the camera. "Patricia, if you're seeing this, I want you to know I forgive you. We were friends once, before power corrupted you. I understand the temptation Richard offered, but I have to protect the truth, protect the families you've helped destroy. Sarah was your friend too. Remember? Before the money meant more than lives." Melissa buried her face in Michelle's shoulder, hearing her mother's voice. James sat rigid, tears streaming silently down his face. "The truth matters more than power," Lucia's recording continued. "Sarah believed that. Emma died believing that. And if I die for believing it too, at least I'll die knowing I chose love over fear." Patricia broke down, years of carefully maintained control shattering. "Stop, please. I'll tell you everything." What followed was a confession that shook Austin's business community to its core. Names were named, conspiracies revealed, decades of crimes exposed. Richard's entire empire, built on blood and betrayal, collapsed under the weight of truth. Sarah Thompson discovered evidence of illegal weapons being shipped through their electronics store, Patricia revealed through tears. Lucia found the same evidence years later. Emma Walker overheard us discussing it. Each time, Richard ordered their elimination. And I helped. God help me, I helped. The judge called a recess, but the damage was done. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed, cameras flashed. Justice, long delayed, began rolling forward with unstoppable momentum. "Your mother," James said softly to Michelle, "she didn't die for nothing. Neither did Lucia. They died protecting the truth, protecting future families from experiencing what we did." Melissa, wise beyond her years, added, "They knew the truth would dance into the light eventually. That's why they left us the evidence. why they trusted us to finish their story. Deborah touched her locket, where Emma's picture lay close to her heart. Truth has a way of rising like cream to the top, no matter how hard they try to bury it. Michelle watched Patricia being led away, seeing not a monster but a woman who had lost her soul to greed, who had betrayed not just friends but her own humanity. "What happens now?" Melissa asked, looking at her assembled family. Now Michelle answered, hugging her niece close, "We honor their sacrifice by living in truth, by choosing love over power, by dancing in the light they helped reveal." The courtroom would reconvene, sentences would be passed, justice would be served. But the real victory had already been won. Truth had emerged from darkness, and with it, the chance for healing could finally begin. 3 months after the trial, the Garcia mansion underwent a remarkable transformation. Where once power and secrets had ruled, now warmth and transparency reigned. James had turned the vast estate into a sanctuary for families affected by corporate crime. The Sarah Thompson Lucia Garcia Foundation Michelle read from the new plaque at the entrance, helping families rebuild after injustice. The former master study, where Richard had plotted so many tragedies, now served as a counseling center. The walls, once adorned with symbols of power, now displayed photographs of survivors, their stories of recovery offering hope to others. "Look what came from the storage unit," James called, carrying a dusty box into the renovated living room. Inside, they found treasures they thought lost forever: Sarah and Lucia's original dance costumes, programs from their performances, friendship bracelets they'd made as teenagers. They were so happy, Melissa observed, holding up a photo of the two friends in mid-leap, their faces radiant with joy, before all the bad things happened. Their happiness wasn't erased by the bad things, Deborah said wisely, arranging the memorabilia in a display case. It became part of their legacy, their belief in friendship, in truth, in the power of art to heal. The Foundation's first major project was establishing a scholarship fund for children who had lost parents to corporate violence. The inaugural recipients included 3 children whose families had been destroyed by Richard's schemes, now given the chance to pursue their dreams. "Mom and Aunt Sarah would love this," Melissa declared, watching the scholarship recipients practice in the mansion's new dance studio. "They always said dance could save lives." Detective Marshall, now a regular visitor and board member of the Foundation, brought more files from the cold case unit. "We've identified 6 more families affected by Richard's operations in the 90s. The compensation fund should help them rebuild." But the legacy wasn't just about money or justice. It was about transforming pain into purpose, tragedy into triumph. The mansion's ballroom, where Richard had once hosted corrupt businessmen, now held weekly support group meetings. Survivors shared stories, found strength in unity, built new families from the ashes of loss. Michelle led many of these sessions, her own journey from orphan victim to empowered advocate, inspiring others. "Our mothers taught us that truth doesn't stay buried," she would say. "But they also taught us that healing comes through connection, through choosing love over fear." James focused on reforming corporate culture, speaking at business schools about ethical leadership and the true cost of corruption. "My father and Richard built an empire on broken families," he would tell students. "I'm rebuilding it on healing them." Deborah, who had protected in silence for so long, now trained security personnel to recognize signs of corporate crime. Her program, named for Emma, emphasized the importance of speaking up, of protecting the vulnerable, of choosing justice over comfort. The Foundation's work began attracting national attention. Other corporations, seeking to address their own dark histories, reached out for guidance. The model of transparency and restitution that James had established became a blueprint for corporate responsibility. One evening, as sunset painted the mansion in golden light, they gathered in the new memorial garden. Roses bloomed around the central fountain, each variety chosen to represent those lost: yellow for Sarah's sunshine spirit, deep red for Lucia's passion, pink for Emma's youth, white for all the unnamed victims. "I found this in Mum's old dance bag," Melissa said, holding up a worn notebook. Inside, Lucia had written, "Sometimes the greatest dance is the one that continues after we leave the stage. Our steps echo in the movements of those who follow. Our rhythm beats in the hearts we've touched." Michelle traced the words, recognizing her mother's influence in Lucia's philosophy. They knew, didn't they? They knew their fight would continue through us. "Not just through us," James added, watching the scholarship students practice their routines in the studio above. "Through everyone their story touches, everyone who chooses truth over power, love over fear." Deborah adjusted her locket, which now held a small piece of paper bearing Emma's favorite quote, "Dancing is like truthing, you can't fake it if you're really doing it." The legacy of Sarah Thompson and Lucia Garcia lived on not just in the Foundation's work, but in every life touched by their courage, every family healed by their sacrifice, every truth brought to light by their example. "We're still dancing their dance," Melissa said softly, taking her aunt's hand. "Every time we help someone, every time we speak the truth, every time we choose love." The setting sun cast their shadows long across the memorial garden, four figures united by loss, strengthened by truth, dedicated to ensuring that the legacy of their loved ones would continue to transform darkness into light. On the first anniversary of Richard's conviction, the Thompson-Garcia Dance Academy hosted a unique performance. The stage was set with photographs Sarah, Lucia, Emma, and all those lost to corporate greed, their faces illuminated by soft lights. "Are you ready, Michelle?" asked Melissa, adjusting her niece's costume, a perfect blend of Sarah and Lucia's signature styles. The theater was packed with survivors and their families, students and supporters, all gathered to witness what they called the healing dance. Detective Marshall sat in the front row beside James, while Deborah supervised the lighting from backstage, her locket gleaming in the dim light. The performance began with Melissa alone on stage, dancing to a recording of Lucia's voice, reading from her final diary entry, "To my daughter, dance your truth, even when the music seems to have stopped. The rhythm lives in your heart." As the voice faded, Michelle joined her niece. Their duet told the story of loss, of searching, of finding each other. When they reached the moment of their reunion, other dancers emerged, students from the academy, each representing a family touched by tragedy, each moving to reclaim their narrative. James watched from the audience, tears streaming freely as his daughter and sister-in-law danced the story of their healing. He saw Sarah in Michelle's strength, Lucia in Melissa's grace, and something entirely new in their combined resilience. The performance reached its climax with a sequence they called the Truth Dance, the stage filled with dancers, each carrying a photograph of their lost loved ones. As they moved together, the photographs caught the light, creating a kaleidoscope of remembrance and redemption. "This is for you," Emma Deborah whispered from backstage, watching a young dancer perform the routine Emma had loved. The girl wore a pink ribbon in her hair, just as Emma had, carrying her spirit forward through movement. In the final scene, Michelle and Melissa performed a piece they had choreographed together, set to a melody that blended Sarah and Lucia's favorite songs. Their movement spoke of forgiveness, not of forgiveness, not of Richard and his conspirators, but of themselves for the guilt and anger they had carried. "Look," James pointed quietly to Marshall. The detective was watching two young girls in the performance, daughters of one of Richard's earliest victims, now scholarship students at the academy. Their dance celebrated their father's memory while claiming their own future. As the music soared, the dancers created a living memorial, their bodies forming patterns of loss and recovery, darkness and light, separation and reunion. The audience, many of whom had lived similar stories of corporate violence, found themselves moving in their seats, swaying with the rhythm of collective healing. The performance ended with a gesture that left few eyes dry. Each dancer placed their photograph in a circle at center stage, then reached out to connect with those around them, creating an unbroken chain of support and understanding. Afterward, in the Academy's reception hall, survivors shared stories with newfound freedom. The weight of secrecy had been lifted by truth, allowing real healing to begin. "Your mothers would be so proud," an elderly dance teacher told Michelle and Melissa. "They always said art could heal what justice alone cannot." Deborah, surrounded by parents of her security training program participants, shared Emma's story without tears for the first time. She loved to watch the dancers, she said, touching her locket. Now she watches through all of you. James found himself embraced by families he had helped through the foundation. "You turned your father's legacy of destruction into one of restoration," they told him. "You've given us back our dignity." Detective Marshall, who had seen the darkest side of corporate crime, watched the healing unfold with satisfaction. "This is true justice," she observed. "Not just punishment, but restoration. Not just truth, but transformation." As the evening wound down, Michelle found Melissa sitting in the empty theater, looking at the photographs still arranged on stage. "Do you think they can see us?" Melissa asked softly. "Mom and Aunt Sarah and Emma." "I think they dance with us every day," Michelle answered, sitting beside her niece. "In our choices, in our love, in our determination to help others heal." The theater's ghost light cast a gentle glow on the photographs, making them seem alive with possibility. Each face represented not just a loss, but a catalyst for change, a reason to keep dancing toward truth and healing. "We're not just their legacy," Melissa said wisely. "We're their continuation. Their dance goes on through us." Michelle hugged her niece, understanding that healing wasn't an endpoint but a journey, one they would dance together, step by step, day by day, truth by truth. 5 years after Richard's conviction, the Garcia mansion had transformed completely. Where once dark secrets lurked in every corner, now sunlight streamed through open windows, illuminating walls covered with photographs of healing families and successful foundation projects. James sat in his newly renovated office, reviewing applications for the next round of Sarah Thompson-Lucia Garcia scholarships. On his desk stood a recent photo, Melissa performing at her first professional dance recital, Michelle beaming beside her, Deborah clutching her ever-present locket, all of them surrounded by students from the academy. A knock at the door preceded Detective Marshall's entrance. Now retired from the force, she served as the Foundation's head of investigations, helping other families uncover corporate crimes and seek justice. "You'll want to see this," she said, placing a file on his desk. 3 more companies have adopted our transparency protocols. The ripple effect is spreading." James smiled, remembering Lucia's words, "Truth has a way of dancing into the light." Their work was changing corporate culture, one company at a time. In the dance studio downstairs, Michelle watched Melissa teach a class of young survivors. At 16, her niece had blossomed into a remarkable young woman, carrying both Sarah and Lucia's spirit in every movement. "Remember," Melissa told her students, "dance isn't about forgetting our pain. It's about transforming it into something beautiful." Deborah entered quietly, carrying a box of newly discovered photographs. Every few months, more evidence of Sarah and Lucia's friendship emerged, as if they were still guiding their families toward deeper understanding. "Look what I found," she said, showing Michelle a faded picture. 2 young dancers, Sarah and Lucia, performing at their first recital together. On the back, in Lucia's handwriting, "Some friendships transcend time. Some truths outlive lies. Some dances never end." The foundation had grown beyond their wildest dreams. What started as a mission to help corporate crime victims had evolved into a movement for business ethics reform. Companies nationwide sought their guidance on transparency and accountability. "Mum would love this," Melissa said during a break, watching families gather for their weekly support group. She and Aunt Sarah believed in the power of community to heal wounds. The mansion's gardens, once manicured to perfection for Richard's power parties, now bloomed wild and free. Emma's memorial fountain burbled peacefully, surrounded by flowers planted by children learning to trust again. Deborah had finally found peace too. Her security training program had prevented countless crimes, saved numerous families from experiencing what she had endured. Emma's death, while still painful, had become a catalyst for positive change. Sometimes she told her trainees, "The greatest tribute we can pay our lost loved ones is to protect others from similar fate." The future stretched bright before them, full of possibility. The Thompson Garcia Dance Academy had opened branches in 3 states, each offering sanctuary and healing through art. The Foundation's legal team, led by survivors of corporate crime, worked tirelessly to change laws and protect vulnerable families. One evening, as sunset painted the mansion in golden light, they gathered in the memorial garden. James watched Melissa rehearse for her upcoming performance, a piece she had choreographed about the future growing from the past. "Sarah and Lucia would be amazed," Michelle said softly. "Their friendship, their sacrifice, it created all of this." "Not just their sacrifice," James replied. "Your courage, Melissa's resilience, Deborah's dedication, we all played our part in this dance." Detective Marshall joined them, carrying news about Richard. He had died in prison, alone and powerless, while the truth he tried to bury flourished in the light. The interesting thing, she noted, is how many of his former associates now support our work. They've seen that transparency brings more prosperity than corruption ever could. Melissa finished her rehearsal, joining her family by the fountain. "I had a dream last night," she said. "Mom and Aunt Sarah were dancing together again. They looked so happy, so proud." "They are proud," Deborah assured her, touching her locket. "All of them are. Emma too." The future stretched before them like an empty stage, ready for new dances of truth and healing. The Foundation's work would continue, touching more lives, revealing more truths, fostering more healing. "We'll keep dancing their dance," Michelle promised, embracing her niece. "Keep telling their story through every life we touch, every family we help, every truth we bring to light." As night fell, the garden's lights illuminated their path forward. The mansion, once a symbol of power and corruption, now stood as a beacon of hope and transformation. In its halls, the next generation learned to dance with truth, to move with courage, to transform pain into purpose. The legacy of Sarah Thompson and Lucia Garcia lived on, not just in their daughters, but in every life touched by their story, every truth revealed in their name, every dance of healing performed in their honor. 10 years to the day after Richard's arrest, the Thompson Garcia Dance Academy hosted a very special celebration. The old Thompson Electronics store, now a thriving dance studio and community center, was filled with light, music, and the warmth of hundreds of gathered families. Melissa, now 21 and a professional dancer, stood center stage beside Michelle. Together, they prepared to unveil a permanent installation, a wall of illuminated photographs telling their family's story from tragedy to triumph. "Today," Melissa began, her voice carrying her mother's strength, "we celebrate not just survival, but transformation. 10 years ago, we stood in darkness. Today, we dance in light." The wall illuminated section by section. First, Sarah and Lucia as young dancers, their friendship blazing through time. Then, the dark years newspaper clippings about the Thompson fire, Lucia's death, Emma's tragedy. Finally, the restoration, the academy's opening, healing performances, scholarship recipients, families rebuilt. James watched from the audience, gray touching his temples now, but his eyes bright with pride. Beside him sat Deborah, her locket now containing 4 generations of photos: Emma, Melissa, and the youngest scholarship students she had come to love as her own. Detective Marshall, retired but still fiercely dedicated to their cause, smiled as she surveyed the crowd. Many faces she recognized from cases over the years, survivors who had become advocates, victims who had become victors. "Our mothers believed in the power of truth," Michelle addressed the gathering. "They believed that light always overcomes darkness, that love conquers fear, that some dances never truly end." Melissa continued, "Their legacy lives in every person here who chose to transform pain into purpose, loss into love, tragedy into triumph." The academy had become more than a dance school. It was a sanctuary where healing happened through movement, where truth was honored through art, where broken families found wholeness in community. As if to demonstrate this transformation, the stage filled with dancers, students past and present, survivors and their children, each moving to the rhythm of their own healing journey. "Look," Deborah whispered to James, pointing to a young girl in the front row. "She has Lucia's smile, Sarah's fire." The girl was one of their newest scholarship recipients, daughter of a corporate crime victim, now blooming under the academy's nurturing care. In her dance, they saw the future they had fought so hard to create. 10 years ago, Melissa concluded, reaching for Michelle's hand, "We thought our story was ending. Instead, it was just beginning. Every truth revealed, every family healed, every dance shared, it's all part of their legacy. Our legacy." The lights dimmed except for the wall of photographs, their gentle glow illuminating the path forward. In that moment, they all felt it, the presence of those they'd lost, dancing with them still, guiding them toward an ever brighter future. A new chapter was beginning, not just for their family, but for all those touched by their story. The truth had not just set them free, it had given them wings to soar, strength to heal, and purpose to carry forward. The wall of photographs would stand as testament to their journey, reminding future generations that even the darkest night can give way to dawn, that truth and love, like the perfect dance, can transform the world. Spring brought new beginnings to the Thompson Garcia Foundation. As cherry blossoms drifted past the mansion's windows, Michelle and Melissa prepared for their most ambitious project, yet a nationwide network of healing centers for corporate crime survivors. The first center opens in Chicago next month, Melissa announced during their morning meeting. At 21, she had grown into a poised young woman who balanced her professional dance career with the foundation's work. "We're calling it the Sarah and Lucia Center for Truth and Healing." James beamed with pride from his place at the conference table. The foundation's boardroom, once Richard's domain of darkness, now housed dreams of restoration and hope. On the walls hung photographs of their success stories, hundreds of families rebuilt, lives restored, truths uncovered. "Emma would have been 30 today," Deborah said softly, touching her locket. "Sometimes I think she guided us to this moment." The new centers would combine everything they'd learned over the years: dance therapy, legal support, counseling, and community building. Each would feature a wall of truth like the one in their academy, telling stories of survival and transformation. Detective Marshall called James shared, "3 more cold cases solved through our investigative fund. Families finally getting answers after decades of uncertainty." Michelle watched as their staff, many of them survivors themselves, moved through the mansion with purpose. What had once been a house of secrets had become a beacon of truth, its doors open to all seeking healing and justice. Mom's last diary entry, Melissa remembered, talked about ripples becoming waves. She knew that truth, once revealed, couldn't be contained. The foundation's influence had indeed spread like waves. Corporate transparency initiatives inspired by their work were becoming industry standard. The Thompson Garcia Protocol for Ethical Business Practices was being taught in business schools nationwide. "Sarah and Lucia started this dance," Michelle said, hugging her niece. "But look how many have joined in." Through the window, they could see students arriving at the academy next door. Young dancers whose families had been touched by corporate crime, now finding healing through movement and community. Deborah, who had once protected through silence, now taught others to speak their truth. Her security training program had expanded to include advocacy and empowerment, helping survivors reclaim their voices. "We're not just continuing their legacy," James observed, watching the foundation's work unfold around them. "We're expanding it, growing it into something they might never have imagined." The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting their shadows on the wall, no longer separate silhouettes, but a unified shape, moving forward together. In that light, they could almost see Sarah and Lucia dancing beside them, Emma's laughter echoing through time. "The truth really does set you free," Melissa said, repeating her mother's favorite phrase, "but it's love that helps you soar." As they prepared for another day of healing work, their family story continued to inspire others. Each truth revealed, each family restored, each dance shared was a testament to the power of love over fear, light over darkness, hope over despair. The legacy of Sarah Thompson and Lucia Garcia lived on, not just in their daughters, but in every life touched by their courage, every truth brought to light in their name, every dance of healing performed in their honor. Spring breeze carried cherry blossoms past the windows, nature's reminder that beauty can bloom from the hardest ground, that new beginnings are always possible, that some dances truly never end. Christmas Eve at the Garcia mansion brought a different kind of celebration. Where once power plays and secrets had dominated holiday gatherings, now laughter and love filled every corner. The great room, decorated with photographs of their extended family of survivors, glowed with warmth. Melissa, home from her international dance tour, sat at the piano playing the songs her mother and Aunt Sarah had once danced to. "Remember our first Christmas together?" Michelle asked, helping Deborah arrange presents under the tree. Each gift tag bore the name of a child from their foundation's programs. Tomorrow's celebration would include dozens of families touched by their work. "How could I forget?" James smiled, hanging an ornament crafted from one of Lucia's old ballet shoes. "We were all still so fragile, so unsure. Now look at us." Deborah touched her locket, which now held a collection of photos that told their story: Emma's sweet smile, Melissa's first dance recital, Michelle's graduation from law school, James receiving a humanitarian award for the foundation's work. "We're not just survivors anymore," Melissa said, her fingers still moving over the keys. "We're a family chosen by love, united by truth." The doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of Detective Marshall and her family. Over the years, she had become much more than an ally. She was part of their chosen family, her dedication to justice matching their own. "Brought some files, even though it's Christmas," she announced with a wink. 3 more families just found answers through our cold case initiative." They gathered around the fireplace, where photographs of Sarah and Lucia took pride of place. The 2 friends, forever young in their dance costumes, seemed to smile down at the family they'd never imagined but somehow helped create. "To think," Michelle mused, "their friendship started with a simple dance class. Now look at how many lives they've touched." Melissa began playing Silent Night, the same song that had been playing the night they'd first discovered their true connection. The melody filled the room with memories not just of loss, but of finding, of healing, of becoming. "Emma loved this song," Deborah said softly, but without the crushing grief that had once accompanied such memories. Time and love had transformed her pain into purpose, her loss into legacy. James watched his daughter at the piano, seeing echoes of Lucia in her grace, Sarah in her strength, and something entirely her own in her spirit. They had all changed, grown, become more than their tragedies had threatened to make them. Outside, snow began to fall, transforming the foundation's grounds into a wonderland. Tomorrow, these spaces would fill with families celebrating their own journeys from darkness to light. But tonight was for their core family, the ones who had started this dance of healing. "I had a dream last night," Melissa shared, her music softening. "Mom and Aunt Sarah were dancing in this room. Emma was watching, clapping. They were so happy, so proud of what we built." "They are proud," Michelle assured her, embracing her niece. "They see their love living on in every life we touch, every truth we uncover, every family we help heal." As midnight approached, they raised their glasses in their annual toast, not to the past's pain, but to the future's promise. Their family, forged in fire and strengthened by truth, stood as testimony to love's power to transform tragedy into triumph. The mansion, once a monument to power and greed, had become a sanctuary of healing and hope, and in its warm embrace, a family united by choice, rather than blood, celebrated the greatest gift of all, the power of love to dance through darkness into light. On the 25th anniversary of the Thompson Garcia Dance Academy, the stage was set for a performance unlike any other. The old theater, filled with generations of survivors and their families, hummed with anticipation. Melissa, now an internationally acclaimed dancer, stood in the wings beside Michelle. They wore costumes that echoed Sarah and Lucia's final duet, a dance of sisterhood, now transformed into a celebration of healing and hope. "Ready?" Michelle asked, squeezing her niece's hand. "They're all here," Melissa whispered. "Can you feel them?" In the audience, James sat between Deborah and Detective Marshall. His hair had turned silver, but his eyes still shone with the same determination that had helped transform tragedy into triumph. The lights dimmed, and Melissa stepped onto the stage alone. Her dance began with lost movements that spoke of fire, of fear, of families torn apart. But then Michelle joined her, and the story changed. Their duet told the story of finding each other, of truth emerging from darkness, of love stronger than fear. As they danced, images projected behind them Sarah and Lucia in their prime, Emma's smiling face, photographs of hundreds of families healed through their foundation's work. From the audience, Deborah watched through tears of joy, her locket open to reveal 4 generations of love: Emma, Melissa, the children they'd helped, and now their own children, carrying the legacy forward. The performance reached its peak as dancers from every year of the Academy joined them on stage: survivors, children of survivors, those who had found healing through movement and truth. Each carried a light until the stage blazed with hope. "Look, Detective," Marshall whispered to James, pointing to a group of young dancers, children of the families we helped, dancing their own stories now. The final sequence brought everything full circle. Melissa and Michelle performed the very dance Sarah and Lucia had choreographed about friendship transcending time. But now it carried new meaning, speaking not just of 2 friends, but of generations united by love and truth. As the music swelled, the dancers created a living tribute to all they'd lost and all they'd found. Their movement spoke of justice served, of healing achieved, of darkness transformed into light. The performance ended with a gesture that left no eye dry. Every dancer turned to face the photographs of Sarah and Lucia, raising their lights in tribute. In that moment, past and present merged, and all could feel the presence of those who had started this dance of truth and healing. Afterward, in the theater's garden, 3 generations of survivors gathered to celebrate. Children played, families shared stories, and the night air filled with music and laughter. "Mum would love this," Melissa said, watching the community their pain had birthed. She and Aunt Sarah believed in the power of dance to heal souls. "They gave us the first steps," Michelle agreed, hugging her niece. "But look at the dance we've created together." James joined them, wrapping an arm around each. "You've taken their legacy further than they could have dreamed." Deborah, surrounded by her extended family of survivors, finally closed her locket. She didn't need it anymore. Love lived in the faces around her, in the laughter of healed hearts, in the movements of those who had learned to dance again. As night fell, the garden lights illuminated their path forward. The dance would continue through new generations, each adding their own steps to the story of truth, healing, and love's triumph over darkness. In the end, it was Melissa who summed up their journey best. "Some dances never truly end. They just keep growing, healing, transforming, one heart, one truth, one family at a time." Dear viewers, thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of love, truth, and healing. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how the Thompson Garcia family's journey resonated with you. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that celebrate the triumph of truth and family bonds. Hit the like button if you believe in the power of love to transform darkness into light. Share this video with friends and family who might need a reminder that healing is possible and that some dances never truly end. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful content that touches hearts and changes lives. Thank you for being part of our storytelling family.